there are 170 ways to break a person. She had learned every single one. The stone beneath her bare feet was slick with something she refused to name: blood, maybe hers, maybe someone else's from decades past, but Maren no longer cared about the things that used to make her flinch. Pain had become a language she spoke fluently now. Fear had become a skin she'd shed somewhere between day 63 and day 97, left behind in the dark like the girl who once believed in mercy. 170 days. 4,080 hours. She hadn't counted them all. Her mind had fractured somewhere around day 40, splintered like the bones in her left hand that had healed crooked because no one bothered to set them. But her body had counted. Every lash, every burn, every moment the silver chains had eaten through her skin until she could smell her own flesh cooking. Her body had kept a record even when her mind had tried to flee. And now, on the 171st day, something inside that broken body had finally answered back. The dungeon door hung off its hinges behind her, iron twisted like paper, and Maren stumbled into the corridor with legs that barely remembered how to hold weight. The torches along the wall sputtered and died as she passed, as if her very presence devoured light. She should have been weak. Should have been barely conscious. Should have been the half-dead Omega they dragged down into the dark all those months ago, the girl accused of poisoning the Alpha King's sister, the girl who'd screamed her innocence until her voice broke and still no one listened. That girl was gone. Something else wore her skin now. The fortress above her was silent in that particular way that comes just before dawn, when even the night guards grow drowsy and the world holds its breath between darkness and light. Maren's bare feet made no sound on the stone steps. She'd forgotten how to walk like something human, had learned instead to move like the rats that had been her only companions, skittering and soundless. Her shift, what remained of it, hung in tatters that barely covered her gaunt frame. She could count every rib if she wanted to, could trace the roadmap of scars that covered her back, her arms, her throat. But her hands, her ruined, broken hands, weren't shaking anymore. They should have been. Any normal person crawling out of that hell would have been trembling, would have been crying, would have been dying. Maren's hands were steady. And they were glowing. Not brightly. Not yet. Just a faint luminescence beneath the skin, like moonlight trapped under ice, pulsing in time with her heartbeat. She'd first noticed it 3 days ago, in the absolute black of her cell, when the guards had forgotten to feed her again and she'd been too weak to even call out. She'd watched that strange light bloom in her palms and thought she was finally dying, thought her mind had given up and was showing her beautiful lies to ease the passage. Then the shackles had melted. The silver that had bound her for nearly 6 months, that had burned her down to nothing, had simply liquefied and run off her wrists like water. And in that moment, in that impossible moment, Maren had felt something vast and ancient crack open inside her chest. It had no name, not one she knew. It was older than words, older than the pack laws that had condemned her, older than the stone that made up Silverbane Fortress itself. And it was angry. So angry. The rage had come second. First had been the pain, not the pain of torture, but the pain of transformation, of something massive trying to claw its way out of a body too small to contain it. Her bones had shifted. Her teeth had lengthened. Her vision had sharpened until she could see every crack in the dungeon ceiling, every microscopic movement of the beetles in the walls. She hadn't shifted. Not fully. Omegas couldn't shift. Everyone knew that. She'd been tested a dozen times as a child, had stood in the shifting circles during every full moon and felt nothing while the other children transformed around her, their joyful howls echoing through the packlands. Powerless. Worthless. Omega. The words had followed her all her life, whispered behind hands, spoken in pitying tones by people who thought they were being kind. And she'd believed them, had carried that shame like a stone in her chest, had tried so hard to be useful in other ways, working in the healing houses, tending the gardens, serving meals during pack gatherings. She'd been serving the high table the night the Alpha King's sister collapsed, her lips turning blue, foam at her mouth, eyes rolling back. She'd been holding the wine pitcher. She'd been the only one close enough to have done it. No trial. No investigation. Just the Alpha King's cold, golden eyes meeting hers across the great hall, his voice like winter when he'd said one word. Dungeon. His guards had dragged her down before the sister's body had even stopped convulsing. And Kirin, Alpha King Kirin, the most powerful wolf in the Northern Territories, the male who could have commanded her death with a snap of his fingers, had instead ordered something worse. Make her confess. She never did. Not even when they'd tried every method they knew. Not even when the head guard, a vicious male named Garrick with breath like rotting meat, had whispered that it would be so much easier if she just admitted it, just gave them the name of who'd put her up to it. There was no name to give. No confession to make. Just pain and darkness and the slow realization that truth didn't matter, had never mattered, would never matter. No one was coming for her. No one cared if an Omega lived or died. So she'd stopped waiting for rescue and started waiting for death. Except death hadn't come. This had. Marin climbed the spiral stairs with increasing speed, her initial weakness burning away with every step. The glow in her hands was spreading now, creeping up her forearms like veins of light beneath her skin. It didn't hurt. It should have. Everything else hurt. Every breath was agony in her cracked ribs, every movement pulled at wounds that hadn't healed, but the light felt right, felt like something returning to where it belonged. She could hear them now. The guards in the upper levels, their heartbeats loud as drums, their breathing heavy with sleep and boredom. 12 of them in the barracks, just above the dungeon entrance. She knew because she'd counted their footsteps every morning during shift change, had memorized the patterns of this place through sound alone. Escape would mean going through them. Old Marin, the Omega who'd served wine and tended gardens, would have been terrified. Would have hidden. Would have waited for a better opportunity that would never come. The thing that wore her skin now felt only that vast, cold rage. And hunger. Gods, the hunger. Not for food, her stomach had forgotten what food felt like, but for air that didn't reek of waste and suffering. For sky. For the moon she hadn't seen in so long she'd almost forgotten its face. The moon that was calling her now, singing in her bones even though it should have been dawn, even though the moon should have been sleeping somewhere beyond the horizon. Come home, it whispered. Come home, daughter. Come home. Marin burst through the door at the top of the stairs. The guards had exactly 1 second to register her presence, this skeletal thing in rags, this ghost with glowing hands and eyes that reflected light like an animal's, before something inside her snapped free. She didn't remember moving. Didn't remember the how. One moment she was in the doorway, weak and swaying, and the next she was across the room, her hand wrapped around Garrick's throat, lifting him off his feet. He weighed at least twice what she did. He was a full-blooded warrior, trained and armed. She held him in the air with one hand and felt nothing but that singing rage. His eyes bulged. His hands clawed at her arm, her skeletal, scarred arm, and couldn't break her grip. The other guards were shouting, reaching for weapons, but they moved so slowly, like insects trapped in amber. She could see every detail of their panic, could smell their fear spiking sharp and acrid in the air. Good, something inside her purred. Let them be afraid. Let them feel a fraction of what she'd felt. Garrick's face was turning purple. It would be so easy. Just a little more pressure and his throat would collapse, and he would die knowing what it felt like to be powerless, to be at someone else's mercy, to beg with your eyes because you had no breath for words. Do it, the rage urged. He deserves it. They all do. But. Marin looked at her hand, glowing bright now, bright enough to cast shadows, and saw the monster they'd accused her of being. Saw herself becoming the thing they'd punished her for, the murderer she'd never been. Is this what she wanted? To prove them right? The thought was small and quiet beneath the roar of power, but it was enough. She dropped Garrick. He hit the floor gasping, coughing, alive. Then she ran. Behind her, the guards erupted into chaos, shouting, chasing, but Marin was already gone, bursting through the barracks and into the main corridor. Silverbane Fortress was a massive stone structure built into the side of a mountain, all narrow passages and defensive chokepoints, designed to be impossible to escape from. She didn't take the main routes. Didn't head for the gates. Old Marin had worked in the kitchens, had hauled water from the wells, had dumped waste in the chutes. She knew the servant passages, the forgotten ways. She ran through the kitchen, past the ovens where she'd once baked bread, past the prep tables where she'd chopped vegetables, past startled cooks who barely had time to recognize her, and threw herself into the waste chute. The drop was 20 feet into the refuse pit outside the fortress walls. She fell without screaming. The impact should have broken her legs. She landed in rotting garbage and rainwater. It had been raining. The world outside was wet. She could hear it, smell it, and rolled to her feet with only a slight stumble. Impossible. She was impossible. Marin ran. The refuse pit was at the base of the mountain, and beyond it stretched the forest, dark pine and ancient oak, wild territory where only the bravest or most foolish wolves hunted. The sky above was wrong, she noticed, even as her legs devoured distance. Too dark for dawn. And the clouds were moving strangely, swirling, gathering. Alarms began to sound behind her. The fortress waking up. They'd discovered her empty cell. They'd found Garrick gasping on the floor. Soon there would be hunting parties, trackers, warriors who actually knew how to fight. She had to move faster. The tree line was 100 yards away. 70. 50. The first arrow hit the ground 3 inches from her left foot. Marin didn't slow. Didn't look back. More arrows now, a volley of them, but the archers were shooting from the fortress walls, and she was small and fast, and the darkness was her ally. One arrow grazed her shoulder, a line of fire, bright and sharp, but it didn't stop her. Nothing was going to stop her. The forest swallowed her whole. Immediately, everything changed. The air was different here, wild, untamed, thick with the scent of growing things and animal musk. The trees were massive, their trunks wider than her armpan, their branches creating a canopy so dense that barely any light penetrated. Marin plunged deeper, her feet finding purchase on roots and moss without thought, her body remembering how to move through wilderness even though she'd been city-bound for years, trapped in the fortress, trapped in the dungeon. Free. She was free. The word was so foreign she almost didn't recognize it. Behind her, she could hear them gathering, raised voices, the baying of tracking hounds, the organized chaos of a hunt beginning. They would come after her. Of course they would. An escaped prisoner was bad enough, but an escaped prisoner accused of trying to assassinate the Alpha King's sister? They would hunt her to the ends of the earth. Let them try. Marin pushed harder, running until her lungs burned and her vision blurred, until the sounds of pursuit faded into the distance. The forest grew wilder, older, the trees spaced differently, the undergrowth thicker. She was entering the deep woods now, the places where pack wolves didn't venture, where the old things still lived. She should have been terrified. She felt like she was coming home. The glow in her hands was still there, pulsing, and it seemed to respond to the forest, growing brighter when she passed certain trees, dimming near others. As if it recognized this place. As if it belonged here. Just like the moon was still singing in her bones, getting louder now, more insistent. Look up, it urged. Look up and see. Marin stumbled to a stop in a small clearing where a stream cut through the rocks, providing the first break in the canopy. Her whole body was shaking now, not from fear, but from exhaustion and shock and the sheer impossibility of what she'd just done. She'd escaped. Actually escaped. For a moment, she just stood there, breathing hard, feeling the rain on her face for the first time in 170 days. It was cool and clean and perfect, washing away the stink of the dungeon, the blood, the horror. Then she looked up. The sky was wrong. Not wrong. Impossible. It was still night. It should have been dawn. The timing was all wrong, but night stretched overhead, clouds parting to reveal the moon. Except the moon was red. Blood red. Crimson as a wound. It hung in the sky like a watching eye, full and massive and completely, utterly impossible. The moon wasn't supposed to turn red. That was a legend, a myth, something from the old stories that the elders told children to make them behave. The moon turns red when the lost bloodline wakes, they'd said. When the ancient power returns. When the world is about to change. Maren stared at that red moon and felt something in her chest tear open. The glow in her hands erupted. Light poured from her skin, not just her hands now but everywhere, racing along her arms, her legs, her throat. She looked down at herself and saw her veins illuminated from within, saw her bones casting shadows through her flesh, saw herself becoming something that wasn't quite solid anymore. And with the light came pain. Not the pain of torture. She was so far beyond that now it almost seemed quaint. This was transformation pain. Rebirth pain. The pain of something massive being forced through a space too small, being compressed into a form that couldn't possibly contain it. Her bones shifted. Not into a wolf, she'd never shifted, didn't know how, but into something else, something the shape of her human body couldn't quite hold on to. She fell to her knees in the stream, the water hissing where it touched her glowing skin, steam rising in clouds. "Make it stop," part of her begged. "Please, make it stop, I can't. But another part, that vast ancient part that had woken in the dark, whispered, "Finally. Finally. Finally." The light burst from her in a wave that flattened the grass and sent the stream water splashing up the banks. Every tree in the clearing bent away from her. Every night bird took flight, their startled cries filling the air. And then, silence. The light faded, sinking back beneath her skin, leaving her kneeling in the stream, gasping, alive, changed. Maren looked at her hands. They weren't glowing anymore, but they weren't the same either. The scars were still there. She would carry those forever, she suspected, but there was a mark now on both palms, silver lines that formed a pattern she didn't recognize. A circle within a circle, with lines radiating out like sun rays or moon phases. The mark. She'd seen it before, once, in an old book in the Pack library when she'd been learning to read. The librarian had snatched the book away before she could ask questions, had muttered something about banned texts and inappropriate materials for Omegas. But she remembered the illustration. Remembered the caption beneath it. The mark of the moon chosen. Last seen in the age of the first wolves. That was impossible. The moon chosen were legends. Myths. The most powerful shifters ever to exist, blessed directly by the moon goddess herself, capable of power that made modern alphas look like children playing dress-up. They'd all died. The bloodline had ended centuries ago, wiped out in the Purge Wars, when the Packs had feared their power too much to let them live. Every last one slaughtered. Or so the histories claimed. Maren's hands shook as she stared at the marks. This wasn't possible. She was nobody. An Omega. Powerless. She'd been tested, examined, declared void of any shifter ability. Unless they'd been wrong. Unless they'd never known what to look for. Unless the power had always been there, buried so deep it took 170 days of torture to crack her open enough for it to emerge. A twig snapped behind her. Maren whirled, dropping into a crouch without thinking, her body moving in ways it had never moved before, predatory, balanced, ready. A figure stood at the edge of the clearing. Even in the darkness, even with the rain falling harder now, she knew him instantly. Would have known him blind and deaf, because his presence was like a physical weight on the air, like gravity had intensified just because he'd entered the space. Alpha King Kirin. He stood perfectly still, rain streaming down his face, his golden eyes, wolf eyes, even in human form, locked on her with an intensity that made her want to run and fight in equal measure. He was tall, broad-shouldered, built like violence and power, his dark hair plastered to his skull. And he was looking at her like he'd seen a ghost. No, not a ghost. Like he'd seen salvation and damnation wrapped in the same skin. Maren bared her teeth when had her canines gotten so long, and felt that rage come surging back, hot and vicious and hungry. This male had done this to her. Had condemned her without trial, had ordered her torture, had left her to rot in the dark. Her fated mate. She'd known it the second he appeared, felt it like a chain snapping into place around her heart. The bond was there, bright and undeniable, singing between them with a force that made her want to vomit. The universe had to be laughing. Had to be. To make her fated mate the one person she hated more than anyone alive. Kieran took a step forward, his hand raised, not threatening, almost pleading. Maren, he said, and his voice was different than she remembered. Rougher. Shaken. You're the moon. She didn't let him finish. She ran. Not away from him, her body wouldn't let her. The bond was already trying to drag her back, but deeper into the forest, toward the wild heart where even alpha kings didn't follow. Behind her, she heard him curse and give chase. And above them both, the blood-red moon watched and waited and knew that everything was about to burn. If this story has already grabbed hold of your heart, if you feel the rage and pain and impossible hope building inside you, then you're in the right place. Subscribe to Shayla's Romance Library, because this is where we tell the stories that don't let go, the stories that sink their teeth in and refuse to release. And this story? This is just beginning. She could run faster than she'd ever run in her life, and it still wasn't fast enough. Kieran moved through the forest like he'd been born to it, which, of course, he had. Alpha King of the Northern Territories, the strongest wolf in 3 generations, descended from a line so pure it was supposed to be blessed by the moon goddess herself. He'd probably been running through these woods since he could walk, hunting and training and becoming the perfect predator. Maren had spent most of her life indoors. Serving. Cleaning. Trying to be useful in the only ways an Omega could be. And yet she was staying ahead of him. Barely. But still. Her feet found purchase on wet rocks that should have sent her sprawling. Her hands caught branches that should have been invisible in the darkness. Her body twisted through gaps in the undergrowth that she shouldn't have been able to see, let alone navigate at a dead run. The power that had erupted from her in the clearing was still there, humming beneath her skin, feeding her strength she didn't understand. Every breath brought the scent of the forest into her lungs, pine and moss and rich earth, rain and animal musk and something older, something that had no name, but felt like memory encoded in her bones. She could smell him too. Kieran. His scent cut through everything else like a blade, cedar and smoke and winter storms, unmistakably alpha, unmistakably male, unmistakably hers. That last part made her want to claw her own nose off. The bond was a living thing between them now, a rope of light that only she could see, stretching from her chest back to where he followed. It pulled. Gods, how it pulled. Every step away from him felt like walking upstream against a current, like her own body was betraying her, trying to drag her back to the one person who'd destroyed her. No. She wouldn't stop. Wouldn't let the bond dictate her choices. Wouldn't let biology override the rage that burned in her chest like a second heart. He'd left her to rot. To be tortured. For 170 days. The bond could burn for all she cared. Maren, stop. His voice carried through the trees, rough with something that almost sounded like desperation. You don't understand. She understood perfectly. A ravine opened up in front of her with no warning. The ground simply ended, dropping away into darkness and the sound of rushing water far below. 20 feet across at least, maybe more. Impossible to jump. Impossible to cross. Maren didn't slow down. She hit the edge and leaped. For one perfect moment, she hung suspended in the air, rain falling around her, the red moon visible through a break in the canopy above. Gravity hadn't caught her yet. The fall hadn't started. She was flying, weightless, free. Then physics remembered she existed. She plummeted. The far side of the ravine rushed up to meet her too far. She'd miscalculated. She wasn't going to make it, and some instinct made her reach out, made her hands grasp for anything, for nothing, for help that wouldn't come. Light exploded from her palms. Not light. Power. Raw and silver and ancient, lashing out like whips, like ropes, like extensions of her own desperate will. They caught the rocks on the far side, held for a fraction of a second, and pulled. Marin's body jerked forward in midair, momentum shifting, trajectory changing. She hit the far edge hard enough to knock the breath from her lungs, her fingers scrabbling for purchase on wet stone. For a moment she hung there, legs dangling over the void, arms screaming as they took her full weight. Then she hauled herself up and over, collapsing on solid ground, gasping. What was that? What in all the gods and their graves was that? She stared at her hands, marked, glowing faintly, completely unfamiliar, and felt terror cut through the rage for the first time since she'd escaped. She wasn't just different. She was something else. Something that could manifest power from nothing, that could cross impossible distances, that could. A heavy weight landed on the ground beside her. Marin rolled away on pure instinct, coming up in a crouch, ready to fight or flee or both. Kieran straightened to his full height on the other side of the ravine edge. He'd jumped it. Of course he had. He was an alpha king at the peak of his power, and 20 feet was probably nothing to him. But he wasn't looking at her with anger or triumph or the cold dismissal she remembered from that night in the Great Hall. He was looking at her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. Like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking his entire life. It made her want to hit him almost as much as it made the bond sing with vicious satisfaction. "Don't," she rasped, her voice raw from disuse and screaming and all those days in the dark. "Don't come closer." He froze. Actually froze, like her words had physical weight. The Alpha King, the male who commanded thousands, stopped because a broken Omega told him to. Wrong. Not an Omega. Not anymore. Maybe never was. Marin. Her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. Like a curse. Like both. I need you to listen to me. I need you to. You need. The laugh that came out of her was sharp enough to cut. You need? Do you have any idea what I needed for the last 6 months? Do you have even the smallest comprehension of what your needs cost me? Something flickered across his face. Pain, maybe. Regret. It was gone too fast to name, buried under the iron control that alphas wore like armor. I know. His voice was low, careful, like he was approaching a wounded animal. Which, she supposed, he was. I know what happened to you. I know it was. You know nothing. She was on her feet now, swaying slightly but standing when she should have been dead. You weren't there. You weren't in the dark listening to your own bones break. You weren't the one screaming until your throat bled and no one came. No one cared. You gave the order and walked away and I. Her voice cracked. No, she wouldn't cry. Wouldn't give him tears. She'd used all her tears up somewhere around day 40, had wrung herself dry of anything soft or weak or human. Kieran took a step forward. The thing inside her, the vast, ancient thing that had woken in the dungeon, surged up with a snarl. Light erupted from her skin again, but this time it didn't fade. It built, growing brighter, hotter, spreading from her chest outward until she was incandescent with it. The air around her began to shimmer. The rain hitting her skin turned to steam. And somewhere deep in her chest, something that felt like a second consciousness stirred and rose and looked through her eyes at the Alpha King with absolute, primal recognition. Mate, it purred. Ours. 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 And beneath that, threat. Danger. Kill. The two imperatives crashed into each other inside her skull, tearing her in different directions. Claim him, destroy him, submit to him, make him bleed. Marin screamed. Not from pain. From the sheer impossible pressure of being pulled apart by her own instincts, by power she didn't know how to control, by a bond she never asked for with a male who'd proven he couldn't be trusted. The light turned white-hot. Blinding. She could feel it building toward something catastrophic, some release that would level the forest, that would. Kieran moved. He didn't attack. Didn't try to restrain her or force her to submit or any of the things an alpha normally did when confronted with a threat. He knelt. The Alpha King of the Northern Territories dropped to his knees in the mud and rain, bowed his head, and bared his throat. Total submission. The wrongness of it shocked Marin so completely that the power stuttered and dimmed. Alphas didn't submit. It wasn't in their nature. Their wolves wouldn't allow it, would fight death before dishonor. And an Alpha King? An Alpha King bowed to no one, not even the other alphas under his command. It was law. It was biology. It was absolute. Yet there he was. Kneeling. Vulnerable. Offering her the kill shot if she wanted it. I'm sorry. The words were quiet but clear, carrying across the space between them. I'm so sorry, Marin. For all of it. For every moment. For every wound. I'm sorry, and I know it means nothing, and I know you have every right to hate me, but I need you to know. Stop. She couldn't breathe. The bond was screaming at her to go to him, to accept the apology, to let this be over. Stop talking. Just stop. He stopped. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the rain and her ragged breathing and the distant sound of water rushing through the ravine behind them. Marin wanted to run again. Wanted to let the power loose and see what happened. Wanted to hurt him the way she'd been hurt. Wanted to make him understand on a level deeper than words what those 170 days had cost. But he was kneeling in the mud. And the bond was there, undeniable, singing its truth between them whether she wanted it or not. And some traitorous part of her, some small piece that had somehow survived the dungeon intact, whispered, "What if he's telling the truth? Why are you here?" The question came out flat. Dead. How did you even find me? Kieran didn't lift his head. Didn't move from his submissive posture. I've been watching the dungeon for 3 days. Ever since I discovered, he stopped, his jaw working like the words were fighting him. I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. And when I went to correct it, to get you out, you were already gone. Lies. Had to be lies. You expect me to believe that you, the Alpha King who ordered my torture, suddenly had a change of heart? No. The word was raw. I don't expect you to believe anything. I don't have the right to ask for your trust. But I'm telling you the truth anyway, because you deserve that much at least. You deserved it from the beginning, and I failed you. The power inside her stirred again, but differently this time. Not attacking. Curious. It wanted to know more, wanted to understand the male who'd hurt them, and was now offering submission. Marin's hands clenched into fists, the marks on her palms burning. Tell me then. Tell me what changed. What happened 3 days ago that made you suddenly care whether I lived or died? Kieran's shoulders tensed. I found evidence. Proof that you were innocent. That you'd been, his voice broke. Actually broke. That you'd been set up. Framed. And that I'd been too blind, too trusting, too much of a fool to see it. The words hit her like physical blows. Evidence. Proof. Innocent. Things she'd screamed until her voice gave out. Things she'd known with absolute certainty. Things that should have been investigated before they dragged her into the dark. Who? The question came out as a growl. Who framed me? He lifted his head then, and the look in his golden eyes made something in her chest constrict. Pain. Deep, soul-cutting pain. The kind that came from betrayal by someone close. My beta, he said quietly. Darius. My closest friend since childhood. The one person I trusted with everything. He confessed 3 days ago when I confronted him with what I'd found. He'd poisoned Talia himself, timed it perfectly so you'd be the only suspect, then spent the last 6 months feeding me reports about your resistance to questioning. Making sure I stayed angry. making sure I didn't look too closely at what was happening in my own dungeon. Marin couldn't process it. Couldn't fit the pieces together. Why? Why would he do that? Because he knew what you were. Kieran rose slowly to his feet, keeping his movements careful, non-threatening. He's a scholar. Studies the old bloodlines. He recognized something in you, something that wouldn't manifest unless you were under extreme stress. So he created the stress. Used my trust and my grief for my sister to turn me into his weapon. He needed you tortured. He needed you broken down to nothing. Because he needed the power inside you to wake up. The red moon. The marks on her palms. The impossible strength and speed, and that moment in the clearing when light had poured from her skin. Moon chosen. He wanted my power, she said slowly. He framed me for murder and let me be tortured for 6 months so he could what? Steal it. Not steal. Bind. Kieran's hands clenched at his sides. There are rituals. Old, forbidden magic. Ways to take a moon chosen's power if you know the right moment, the right state. He was planning to bind your power to himself once it fully manifested. He would have become the most powerful wolf alive. Would have. Past tense. What did you do to him? Marin asked, and some dark part of her hoped the answer would be violent. He's in the same cell you were in. Kieran's voice was empty. Cold. Waiting for the council to decide his fate. I wanted to kill him. My wolf wanted to tear him apart. But I needed him alive long enough to tell me where he'd hidden the proof. Long enough to make sure everyone knew what he'd done. What I'd allowed him to do. The self-recrimination in those last words was thick enough to taste. Marin studied him, really looked at him for the first time since that night in the Great Hall. He was soaked from the rain, mud on his knees from kneeling, his dark hair plastered to his skull. But it was his eyes that caught her. Haunted. Hollow. The eyes of someone who'd discovered they'd become a monster without realizing it. Good, the angry part of her thought. Let him suffer. Let him know what it feels like. But the bond, the cursed, undeniable bond, made her feel his pain like it was her own. Made her want to comfort him, to forgive him, to close the distance between them and... No. She took a step back. You think a confession and an apology makes this right? You think explaining why you tortured me for 6 months somehow excuses it? No. He didn't move toward her. Nothing makes it right. Nothing excuses it. I failed you in every way it's possible to fail someone. I'm not here asking for forgiveness, Marin. I'm here because there are things hunting you now. Things that felt the power wake when the moon turned red. And I'm here because... He stopped, his throat working. Because, she pressed. Because you're my mate. The words were barely a whisper. Because the bond snapped into place the moment I saw you in that clearing, glowing like the moon goddess herself, and I realized that the person I'd spent 6 months destroying was the one person the universe made for me. And I know that's the worst possible timing. I know you hate me. I know I deserve that hatred. But I also know that if I let you run off into these woods alone, you'll die. And I've already failed you once. I won't do it again. The honesty of it was like a slap. Raw and unfiltered and completely without the careful political speech that alphas usually used. Marin's laugh was bitter. So you're here to protect me? Is that it? The big strong alpha king riding to the rescue. No. Kieran met her eyes steadily. I'm here to help you if you'll let me. To teach you how to use what's waking up inside you before it consumes you. To stand between you and everything that's coming. Not because you're weak, you're the strongest person I've ever met to survive what you survived, but because you shouldn't have to face this alone. Something in her chest twisted. The bond, maybe, or just the treacherous human desire to believe in help, in hope, in the possibility that she wasn't completely abandoned. I don't trust you, she said flatly. I know. I hate you. I know. The only reason I'm not killing you right now is because I don't know how to control whatever this is, she gestured at her marked hands, and I might actually need the information you have. I know. His acceptance of it, his complete lack of argument or attempts to convince her otherwise, was somehow worse than if he'd fought back. Marin wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how cold she was, how the rain had soaked through what was left of her clothing, how her body was still gaunt and scarred and broken in ways that might never heal. "What's hunting me?" she asked, because if she was going to survive the next few hours, she needed information more than she needed pride. Kieran's expression darkened. "The red moon is a beacon. Every pack in the territory will have seen it. Every pack will know what it means. Some will want to kill you before you become too powerful. Some will want to capture you and use your power for themselves. And there are older things that aren't wolf, that remember the moon chosen and what they could do. They'll be coming too. Perfect. Wonderful." She'd escaped one prison only to become the most hunted creature in the territory. "How long do I have?" she asked. "Until dawn, maybe. The red moon will fade with sunrise. But by then..." He hesitated. "By then, every tracker in my pack will be out here looking for you. I couldn't exactly tell them to let you go when you're an accused murderer and an escaped prisoner. The council is demanding your recapture. I can slow them down, but I can't stop them. Not without revealing what you are, and that would only make things worse." Marin's mind raced. Dawn was hours away still. She could run, could try to put distance between herself and Silverbane, but she had no supplies, no allies, no idea where to go. And if other packs were coming, if ancient creatures were hunting her, she wouldn't last a day alone. She looked at Kieran, her mate, her torturer, the only source of information about what she was becoming, and felt the weight of impossible choices crushing down on her. "If I let you help me," she said carefully, "I need something from you first." "Anything. Swear on the bond that you won't try to take me back to Silverbane. Swear that you'll help me learn to control this power, and then you'll let me go. No strings. No expectations. No bond obligations." Pain flashed across his face, but he didn't hesitate. "I swear it. On the bond, on my life, on everything I am. I'll help you learn to control your power, and then if you want to leave, I won't stop you." The bond flared between them, sealing the oath, making it unbreakable. Wolves couldn't lie when they swore on the mate bond. It would tear them apart from the inside. He meant it. He would actually let her go. The realization was almost as shocking as everything else that had happened tonight. Marin took a shaky breath. "Fine. Then we have until dawn. Teach me." Kieran's expression shifted into something that might have been relief or determination or both. "First, we need to get you warm and fed. You're running on fumes and adrenaline, and if you try to access your power in this state, it could kill you. I've survived worse than being cold and hungry. I know." The quiet acknowledgement, without pity or horror, just acceptance of what she'd endured, made something in her chest ache. "But you don't have to survive anymore. You can live. And living starts with taking care of yourself." Before she could respond, a howl split the night. Distant but clear, coming from the direction of Silverbane. Then another. And another. A whole chorus of them, rising in harmony. The hunt had begun. Kieran's eyes flashed gold. "We need to move. Now. There's a place I know, deep in the old woods. They won't find us there." "How do you know?" "Because it's sacred ground. Moon-blessed. Your power will hide us." He held out his hand. "Trust me. Just for tonight. Just long enough to survive until dawn." Marin looked at his offered hand. At the male who'd destroyed her and was now offering salvation. At the bond that tied them together whether she wanted it or not. She didn't take his hand. But she nodded. "Lead the way," she said. "But if this is a trap, if you're lying, I'll find a way to make you regret it." "If this is a trap," Kieran said quietly, "I'll hand you the knife myself." Then he turned and ran, and after a moment's hesitation, Marin followed. Not because she trusted him. Not because she'd forgiven him. But because survival was more important than pride, and she learned in the dungeon that you did whatever it took to see another sunrise. Even if it meant running beside the monster who'd put you there. The bond hummed between them as they ran, and the red moon watched from above, and somewhere in the distance, the howls grew closer. The forest changed as they ran deeper. Maren felt it in her bones before she saw it, a shift in the air, in the quality of darkness, in the way the trees grew. The pines gave way to ancient oaks with trunks so massive it would take 10 people holding hands to circle them. The undergrowth thinned to moss and night-blooming flowers that glowed faintly in the darkness, their petals releasing a scent like honey and moonlight. Sacred ground. She could feel it humming beneath her feet, resonating with the power that pulsed under her skin. Kieran moved ahead of her with the fluid grace of a predator completely at home in the wild, but he kept glancing back, checking that she was still there, still keeping pace. Each time their eyes met, the bond flared between them, a reminder, a pull, a curse. Maren focused on her breathing instead. In and out. One foot in front of the other. Ignore the cramping in her legs from muscles that had atrophied during months of confinement. Ignore the way her ribs ached with every breath. Ignore the 100 small pains that her body was screaming at her, now that the initial rush of adrenaline was fading. She'd gotten good at ignoring pain. 170 days was a masterclass in endurance. The howls behind them had faded, either they'd lost the trackers or the sacred ground was already providing some protection. Kieran slowed his pace, then stopped in a clearing where a spring bubbled up from between moss-covered rocks, feeding a small pool that reflected the red moon like a mirror of blood. "Here," he said quietly. "We'll be safe here until dawn." Safe. The word felt foreign. Maren wasn't sure she remembered what safety felt like anymore. She approached the pool cautiously, half expecting a trap, but there was nothing. Just clean water and soft moss and the scent of growing things. Her reflection stared back at her from the surface, and for a moment, she didn't recognize the creature looking back. Gaunt. Hollow-cheeked. Eyes too large in a skeletal face. Hair that had once been long and dark, now chopped short and uneven. She'd cut it herself in the dungeon after a guard had grabbed it during a beating, had used a sharp rock to saw through it in the darkness. The scars were visible even in the dim light, crossing her throat, her arms, disappearing beneath the rags of her shift. She looked like exactly what she was, a survivor of something that should have killed her. The marks on her palms glowed faintly in the reflection, the only beautiful thing about her. Maren turned away from her reflection before the self-loathing could take root. She'd spent too many hours in the dark cataloging her failures, her weaknesses, her complete inability to be anything other than a burden. She didn't need to do it now. Kieran was gathering wood with practiced efficiency, arranging it into a fire pit. "You should drink," he said without looking at her. "The water here is moon-blessed. It'll help your body heal." She wanted to argue, to maintain her distance, but thirst won out. Maren knelt by the pool and cupped her hands, bringing the water to her lips. It was the best thing she'd ever tasted. Cold and sweet and somehow alive, flowing down her throat like liquid light. She could feel it spreading through her, soothing the raw places, easing the constant ache. Not healing, she suspected some things would never fully heal, but helping. Giving her body the resources it desperately needed. She drank until she couldn't hold anymore, then sat back on her heels, breathing hard. Behind her, Kieran had gotten a fire started. Warmth began to spread through the clearing, chasing away the chill of the rain. Maren found herself drawn to it without meaning to, her body seeking heat like a flower seeking sun. She settled on the opposite side of the fire from him, keeping the flames between them like a barrier. Kieran didn't comment on the distance. He simply shrugged out of his cloak a heavy, well-made thing that had probably cost more than she'd earned in a year of service, and held it out to her. "You're shivering," he said. She was. Hadn't even realized it. The cold had seeped so deep into her bones during the dungeon months that she barely registered temperature anymore. Maren stared at the offered cloak like it might bite her. "It's just a cloak," Kieran said quietly. "Not a peace offering or an apology. You're freezing and I'm not, and if you die of exposure, I've failed my oath to help you survive. That's all." The practicality of it, the lack of emotion or expectation, made it easier to accept. Maren took the cloak and wrapped it around herself. It was warm from his body heat and smelled like him, cedar and smoke and winter, which made the bond purr with satisfaction in her chest. She told the bond to shut up. When did you know? The question came out before she could stop it. That I was your mate? Kieran was silent for a long moment, staring into the flames. The moment I saw you in the clearing. When the light was pouring from your skin and the moon turned red. The bond snapped into place so hard it drove me to my knees. He paused. Before that, nothing. I'd seen you around the fortress, of course. You worked in the kitchens, the healing houses. But I never felt anything beyond awareness that you existed. Because she'd been nobody. An Omega. Beneath his notice. The old shame tried to rise, but Maren shoved it down. She wasn't that girl anymore. That girl had died in the dungeon. I wasn't always in the fortress, she heard herself say. The words came from somewhere deep, some part of her that needed him to know she'd had a life before he'd destroyed it. I grew up in a smaller pack. Moonridge. South of here, near the border territories. Kieran's attention sharpened, but he didn't interrupt. Maren stared into the fire and let the memories come. My parents were mid-ranking wolves. Nothing special, but respected. They had 2 children. My older brother, Torin, was perfect. Strong, fast, shifted for the first time when he was 12. Everyone said he'd be an enforcer someday, maybe even a beta if he worked hard enough. The pride in her parents' eyes when they'd watched Torin shift. The way the whole pack had celebrated, throwing a feast in his honor. And then there was me. Her voice went flat. 2 years younger. Weak. Small. I reached shifting age and nothing happened. They thought maybe I was just late, that my wolf was shy or stubborn or needed more time. So they waited. Tested me every full moon. Brought in shamans and healers and wise women to examine me. And every time, the answer was the same. No wolf. No power. Omega. She'd never forget the day the pack's head shaman had declared it officially. Had placed a hand on her shoulder, pity in those ancient eyes, and announced to her parents that their daughter would never shift, would never contribute to the pack's strength, would never be anything more than a burden to be cared for. Her mother had cried. Her father had looked disappointed. Not angry. Disappointed was worse. The pack didn't exile me, Maren continued. They weren't cruel like that. But I became invisible. People stopped expecting things from me. Stopped including me in the youth training. My brother went on to become an enforcer, just like everyone predicted. He tried to look out for me, but he had his own life, his own duties. And I learned to be useful in other ways. Cooking, cleaning, healing work. Things that didn't require a wolf. Things that Omegas were good for. I told myself it was fine. That I was contributing, that I had value even without power. I even started to believe it. She laughed bitterly. And then the attacks started. Kieran's posture shifted slightly. Listening. Rogues, Maren said. A whole band of them, organized and vicious. They hit Moonridge 3 times over the course of a month. The 3rd time, they breached the walls. Got into the residential areas. I was in the healing house when they came through. I hid, of course I hid. I was useless in a fight, and I listened to people die. She could still hear the screaming. Could still smell the blood. My brother found me after. Dragged me out of the hiding spot and demanded to know why I hadn't run, hadn't tried to help, hadn't done anything. And I told him the truth. I was powerless. I was Omega. What exactly did he expect me to do? Torin's face, twisted with disgust and grief and rage. The words he'd said, words that had branded themselves into her soul. He said I was a coward. Said that wolf or no wolf I should have fought. That his sister wouldn't have hidden while people died. Her voice cracked. He said I wasn't his sister anymore. Just a burden the pack couldn't afford. Kieran made a sound low in his throat, not quite a growl, not quite a sigh. The pack didn't exile me, Maren repeated. But they didn't need to. I left on my own. Came to Silverbane because it was big enough that maybe an Omega could disappear into the crowds, could find work that didn't require anyone to care who or what I was. And for a while, it worked. I was invisible again, but at least I was useful. At least I had a purpose. She'd spent 3 years in Silverbane. 3 years serving meals and washing dishes and tending to minor wounds in the healing houses. 3 years of quiet, unremarkable existence. Until that night. I was working the high table the night your sister collapsed, Marin said, and felt Kieran tense across the fire. It was a formal dinner. Some kind of treaty negotiation with the Eastern Pax. I'd been assigned to wine service because I had steady hands and I didn't gossip. I'd filled your sister's cup maybe 5 minutes before she started convulsing. She could see it so clearly, like it was happening all over again. The way Talia's eyes had gone wide. The way she'd clawed at her throat. The foam at her lips, pink with blood. I dropped the wine pitcher and tried to help her. Tried to remember my healing training. Tried to figure out what was wrong. And then your guards grabbed me. Held me while you. Marin stopped, the memory too visceral. Kieran standing over his sister's body, his golden eyes finding Marin across the chaos, going cold and hard as winter. I tried to tell you I didn't do it, she whispered. I tried to explain, to beg for a chance to prove my innocence. But you looked at me like I was less than nothing. Like I was garbage that had dared to touch something precious. And you said one word. Dungeon. Like my life, my truth, my existence meant so little that it didn't even warrant a trial. The fire crackled between them, sending sparks up into the darkness. I thought the dungeon would be temporary, Marin said. I thought someone would investigate. Would find proof that I hadn't poisoned the wine. Would realize that I had no motive, no opportunity beyond the worst timing in the world. I thought justice would happen eventually. Naive. She'd been so naive. The first week, I held on to that hope. Told myself every day that this was the day someone would come, would apologize for the mistake, would let me go. The guards who brought my food, when they remembered to bring food, I asked them about the investigation. They laughed. Said there was no investigation. Said I'd been caught red-handed and the only question was when I'd confess. Day 8, the beatings had started. Day 12, the silver chains. Day 20, the first time Garrick had used the hot irons. I stopped counting after day 40, Marin said. Stopped keeping track of time, of pain, of how many times I'd screamed myself hoarse. The days blurred together into one long nightmare. The only thing that kept me alive was spite. Pure, stubborn refusal to give them the satisfaction of breaking me. And something else. Something she'd barely acknowledged even to herself. I started feeling it around day 90, she said slowly. This heat. Inside my chest. Like something was burning just beneath my sternum. I thought it was infection at first, or fever, or my body starting to shut down. But it didn't feel like dying. It felt like waking up. The power. Stirring in the dark. Responding to her pain, her rage, her absolute refusal to surrender. It got stronger every time they hurt me. Every time the silver burned my skin, every time the whip split my back open, every time I thought I couldn't survive another moment, the heat would pulse, would spread a little further through my body. And I started to hear things. Kieran leaned forward slightly. What kind of things? Whispers, Marin said. Not voices exactly. More like impressions. Feelings. This overwhelming sense that I was supposed to be something else. Something more. That the Omega thing was a lie, a mistake, a cage I'd been locked into. She looked down at her marked palms. And then, 3 days ago, the heat exploded. The shackles melted. And I felt something inside me crack wide open. The transformation in the cell. The moment everything had changed. I didn't understand what was happening, she continued. I still don't, not really. But I knew I couldn't stay there. Knew that if I didn't get out right then, something worse would happen. So I ran. And you found me. The silence that followed was heavy with everything unsaid. All the pain, all the trauma, all the impossible cruelty of fate that had made her fated, made the very person who'd orchestrated her torture. Your brother was wrong, Kieran said finally, his voice rough. You're not a coward. You're not a burden. You survived something that would have killed most wolves in a fraction of the time. You endured torture that was specifically designed to break you, and you didn't break. You didn't confess to something you didn't do. You held on to yourself when every reason said to let go. The words hit something deep in her chest, some wounded place that had never healed. Don't, she said sharply. Don't try to make me feel better about what happened. Don't try to reframe my nightmare as some kind of triumph. I survived because I was too stubborn to die, not because I was strong. There's a difference. Is there? Kieran met her eyes across the fire. Because from where I'm standing, stubbornness in the face of impossible odds is the definition of strength. Maren wanted to argue, but exhaustion was pulling at her now, the brief burst of energy from the moon-blessed water fading. Her body was starting to catalog all the ways it was damaged, all the things that needed rest and food and time to heal. She drew the cloak tighter around herself, hating how good it felt. Hating how the bond hummed contentedly when surrounded by his scent. Hating that some traitorous part of her wanted to move closer to the fire, closer to him, to accept the comfort he was offering. I still hate you, she said, but it came out weaker than she intended. I know, Kieran said. You should. I hate myself for what I let happen to you. The raw honesty in his voice made her look up. He was staring into the fire, his expression carved from stone, but his eyes held an ocean of regret. Darius was my closest friend, he said quietly. My beta, my advisor, my brother in everything but blood. We grew up together. Trained together. I trusted him with my life, with my pack, with everything. When he told me you'd been caught poisoning Talia, when he showed me the evidence he'd planted, I believed him without question. And when he told me you were refusing to confess, that you were playing the innocent victim, I believed that too. His hands clenched into fists. He volunteered to oversee your interrogation personally. Said it would spare me the pain of having to deal with the one who'd tried to murder my sister. I thought he was being a good friend. Protecting me. I didn't ask questions about his methods. Didn't check on your condition. Didn't do any of the things an alpha king should do when one of his people is imprisoned. The self-loathing in his voice was thick enough to cut. I failed you in every possible way, Kieran continued. I failed as an alpha. As a king. As a male who's supposed to protect those weaker than himself. And now the bond tells me you're my mate, the one person I'm supposed to treasure above all others, and I can't even. His voice broke. Maren watched him struggle with his emotions, watched the iron control slip for just a moment, and felt something shift in her chest. Not forgiveness. She was nowhere near ready for that. But understanding, maybe. Recognition that he was capable of remorse, of genuine regret. It didn't change what had happened. Didn't erase the scars, or the nightmares, or the 170 days of hell. But it was something. Your sister, Maren said. Did she survive? Kieran nodded. She's alive. Weak, still recovering, but alive. Darius made sure to give her just enough poison to mimic death without actually killing her. He needed the crime to be serious enough for extreme measures, but not so serious that it would require a formal council investigation. Calculated. Precise. Monstrous. Why did he want my power so badly? Maren asked. There are other Moon-chosen bloodlines, aren't there? Other people he could have targeted. No, Kieran said flatly. You're the last one. The only living heir of the Moon-chosen bloodline. Every other family was wiped out in the Purge Wars. Their lines ended. Darius spent decades searching for survivors, for anyone who might carry even a drop of the blood. He found records of your mother's lineage 3 years ago. Traced you to Silverbane. And then he waited. Waited for the perfect opportunity to destroy her. My mother. Maren's voice came out small. She was Moon-chosen? Her grandmother was. The power skipped 2 generations, which is why it didn't manifest in your mother, or in you naturally. Darius theorized that extreme trauma might force it to surface. So he created the trauma. Her mother, who'd cried when the shaman declared Maren an Omega. Who'd died of fever 5 years ago, never knowing that her daughter carried the blood of legends. I'm the last, Marin whispered. The weight of it settled over her like a shroud. The last of an entire bloodline. Yes, Karen said. Which means every pack that knows what you are will either want to control you or kill you. The Moon Chosen were powerful enough to overthrow alphas, to reshape pack hierarchies, to change the entire structure of our world. They were executed not because they were evil, but because they were threats to the established order. Perfect. She'd gone from invisible Omega to the most dangerous creature alive. I don't know how to use this power, Marin said, looking at her marked palms. I don't even know what I can do besides make things glow and apparently jump farther than physics should allow. That's what I'm here to teach you, Karen said. Or at least, to help you figure out. I've studied the old texts, the histories of the Moon Chosen. I know more about your bloodline than almost anyone alive. Because of course he did. Alpha Kings were educated in pack history, in bloodlines and politics and ancient magic. Marin's eyes were getting heavy despite her best efforts. The warmth of the fire, the safety of the sacred ground, the sheer exhaustion in her bones, it was all pulling her towards sleep. I can't sleep, she said, fighting the pull. They're still hunting us. The trackers won't find us here, Karen said firmly. The sacred ground will hide us from anyone without Moon-chosen blood. And I'll keep watch. You need to rest, Marin. Your body is trying to heal from months of damage while also adjusting to massive amounts of power awakening. If you don't sleep, you'll collapse. She wanted to argue. Wanted to maintain her vigilance, her walls, her absolute refusal to be vulnerable around him. But she was so tired. So achingly, impossibly tired. If you try anything, she mumbled, her eyes already closing, I'll find a way to make you regret it. I know, Karen said softly. Sleep. I'll be here when you wake. That should have been threatening. Should have been terrifying. Instead, some deep part of her, the part that remembered being invisible, being abandoned, being left alone in the dark, found it comforting. Marin's last thought before sleep claimed her was that she was definitely going to regret this. But for now, for this one moment, she was warm and safe and no one was hurting her. For now, that was enough. She dreamed of the moon turning red, of light pouring from her hands, of a voice older than time whispering, "Welcome home, daughter. Welcome home." Marin woke to silver light. Not the harsh white of morning or the soft gold of dawn. This was liquid silver, pure and ethereal, flowing through the clearing like water made of moonlight. It pooled in the hollows of the ancient oaks, dripped from the moss-covered stones, gathered in the spring until the pool glowed like a fallen star. For a disorienting moment, she thought she was still dreaming. Then she felt the marks on her palms burning. Not pain, heat without hurt, like pressing your hands against sun-warmed stone. The silver light was responding to her, or she was responding to it, the connection so natural it felt like breathing. She sat up slowly, Karen's cloak falling from her shoulders, and stared at the transformed clearing. Everything was luminous. The moss pulsed with gentle light. The night-blooming flowers had opened fully, their petals glowing in shades of blue and violet. Even the air itself seemed to shimmer, filled with particles of light that danced and swirled like snow that fell upward instead of down. Sacred ground. She'd felt it last night, but this was something else entirely. It's reacting to you. Marin's head snapped toward Kieran's voice. He stood at the edge of the clearing, his back to one of the massive oaks, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Wonder, maybe? Or fear? Or both tangled together? What is? Her voice came out rough from sleep and disuse. The sacred ground. The moon-blessed places hold onto power, store it like reservoirs. They haven't had a moon chosen to respond to in over 300 years. He gestured at the glowing clearing. You're waking it up. Calling the old magic back to the surface. Marin looked at her hands. The marks were glowing brighter than before, the circles and radiating lines almost seeming to move beneath her skin, rotating slowly like celestial bodies in orbit. She could feel the connection now, not just to the clearing, but to something deeper, something vast that pulsed beneath the earth like a second heartbeat. Old. So impossibly old. Power that had been sleeping since before the Purge Wars, since before the packs had decided that Moonchosen were too dangerous to let live. And it recognized her. The feeling was overwhelming, like being seen for the first time in her entire life, truly seen, not as an omega or a servant or a prisoner, but as something that mattered. Something that belonged. I don't understand, Marin whispered, even though part of her did understand, on a level deeper than words. Why no? Why wake up after all this time? Because you're the first heir to survive long enough for the power to manifest. Kieran moved closer, his steps careful, respectful of the space between them. Darius's research suggested that the Moonchosen bloodline carries a dormant gene. It can skip generations, hide completely, but it's always there. Waiting for the right conditions. The right conditions being torture and trauma? The bitterness in her voice cut through the reverent atmosphere. Extreme stress, Kieran corrected quietly. Life or death situations. Moments when the body has no choice but to evolve or die. The power manifests as a survival mechanism, your bloodline's last desperate attempt to save itself from extinction. So she'd been broken down to nothing so something ancient could claw its way out of her bones. How poetic. How absolutely horrifying. Marin stood, her legs steadier than they'd been last night. The moon-blessed water and sleep had helped, but it was more than that. The power humming through her veins was feeding her strength, knitting together damaged tissue, pouring energy into a body that had been running on empty for months. She could feel herself healing. Not completely, not all at once, but the constant ache in her ribs had dulled. The sharp pain when she breathed deeply had eased. Even the scars on her back felt different, still there, still raised and terrible, but somehow less raw. There's something else here, Kieran said, drawing her attention. Something I need to show you. That's why I brought you to this specific location. Marin's eyes narrowed. You said we were here because it was safe. It is safe. But it's also significant. He gestured toward the far side of the clearing, where the largest oak stood. This isn't just sacred ground. It's a temple. One of the oldest Moonchosen sites in the Northern Territories. She followed his gesture and saw what she'd missed in the darkness last night. The oak wasn't just massive, it was ancient beyond measure, its trunk easily 40 feet across. And carved into the bark, weathered by centuries, but still visible, were symbols. The same symbols that marked her palms. Circles within circles. Radiating lines. Phases of the moon arranged in patterns that spoke of cycles and time and power that waxed and waned with celestial movements. Marin's feet carried her forward without conscious thought, drawn to the tree like iron to a lodestone. The closer she got, the brighter her marks glowed, until the silver light spilling from her palms was bright enough to cast shadows in the pre-dawn darkness. "What is this place?" she breathed. "The Temple of First Howling," Kieran said from behind her. "According to the histories, this is where the first Moonchosen received her power. Where the moon goddess herself descended and blessed a dying wolf with the strength to save her pack. Legend. Myth. The kind of story the elders told to children, exaggerated and romanticized until the truth was buried under layers of fantasy. Except Marin could feel the truth of it thrumming through the ground beneath her feet, rising up through the oak's roots, ancient and undeniable. Something had happened here. Something world-changing. She reached out, her marked palm hovering inches from the carved symbols on the oak's trunk. The air between her skin and the bark crackled with potential, with power recognizing power across the vast gulf of time. "Touch it," Kieran said softly. "It's meant for you." Marin's hand trembled. What if? What if it consumes you? What if it drives you mad? What if it turns you into something monstrous? Kieran's voice was gentle, understanding. Those are valid fears. The histories say that not every Moonchosen survived their awakening. Some were consumed by the power. Some lost themselves to it. Exactly what she needed to hear. But, he continued, those were the ones who fought it. Who tried to reject what they were, who let fear control them instead of accepting their nature. And you think I should just accept this? Maren gestured at herself, at the glowing marks, at the impossible power she didn't ask for and couldn't control. Except that I'm supposed to be some kind of legendary warrior when a week ago I was rotting in a dungeon? No, Kieran said. I think you should choose. The power is yours, it's already awake, already bonded to you. But what you do with it, who you become with it, that's your choice. You can run from it, try to bury it again, spend your life hiding from what you are. Or you can claim it. Learn it. Make it yours on your own terms. Choice. Such a simple word for such an impossible decision. Maren stared at the carved symbols, at the tree that had stood here for perhaps 1,000 years, bearing witness to the rise and fall of the moon-chosen bloodline. How many others had stood where she stood now? How many had pressed their marked palms to this bark and felt their destiny click into place? And how many of them had survived what came after? If I do this, she said slowly, if I touch the tree and accept whatever happens, will it hurt? Kieran was quiet for a moment. I don't know. The histories don't say. But I'll be here. If something goes wrong, if you need to be pulled back, I'll do it. The promise should have meant nothing. He'd failed her before, catastrophically. Why should she trust him now? But the bond between them pulsed with the sincerity of his oath, and Maren found herself believing him despite everything. She took a breath, steadied herself, then pressed her marked palm flat against the carved symbols on the oak's trunk. The world exploded into vision. Not sight, this was beyond sight, beyond any single sense. It was pure knowing, pure experience, pure immersion into memory that wasn't hers, but belonged to her bloodline, encoded in her very cells. She saw the first moon-chosen, a female wolf, gray-furred and dying, lying in this very clearing with her pack slaughtered around her. Rogues had come in the night, had killed everyone, had left her bleeding out beneath the stars with her 2 cubs whimpering against her side. She saw the moon descend, not literally, but its light became solid, became presence, became a goddess with eyes like silver fire and a voice that shook the earth. Live, the goddess commanded. Live and protect what I have made. The dying wolf tried to speak, tried to explain that she was too weak, that her wounds were too deep, that death was already pulling her down into darkness. The goddess smiled. Then be remade. Light poured into the wolf like liquid fire, filling her veins, rewriting her from the inside out. The wounds didn't heal. They transformed, becoming scars that glowed with power, badges of survival rather than marks of defeat. Her wolf grew larger, stronger, touched by divinity. And when she rose, when she threw back her head and howled, the sound split the sky and made every rogue within 100 miles flee in terror. The vision shifted. Generations of moon-chosen, rising and falling like a tide. Some used their power to protect, to heal, to lead their packs into prosperity. Others let the rage consume them, became monsters drunk on their own strength, had to be put down by their own families. The Purge Wars. Alphas banding together out of fear, out of jealousy, out of the very human need to destroy what they couldn't control. Moon-chosen hunted down one by one, their temples burned, their bloodlines scattered and hidden. The last known moon-chosen, a male called Stellan, making a final stand in these very woods. Surrounded by 50 warriors, bleeding from a dozen wounds, he'd called down the moon's wrath one last time. The crater his death had left was visible for miles, they said. A scar on the land that wouldn't heal for a century. After that, nothing. Silence. The bloodline gone dormant, scattered so thoroughly that everyone assumed it had died out completely. Until Maren's great-grandmother, who'd married into a minor pack and never told anyone what she was, had passed the gene down in secret. Until it had skipped 2 generations and landed in a girl declared Omega, dismissed as powerless, left to rot in a dungeon until the torture cracked her open and the ancient power finally had room to emerge. The vision shifted again. This time, Maren saw herself. Not as she was, but as she could be. A female wreathed in silver fire, strong and whole and terrible in her beauty. Scars still visible but transformed into something almost artistic, proof of what she'd survived. Eyes that glowed with moon-touched power. And around her, a pack, no, multiple packs, bowing in respect and awe. Not in fear. In recognition of strength earned through suffering. The vision offered her a choice, wordless but clear. She could be this. Could claim the power fully, let it remake her into something legendary. Could take her place as the first moon chosen in 300 years and reshape the entire structure of pack society. Or she could walk away. Let the power fade back into dormancy. Live a quiet life somewhere far from politics and prophecy and destiny. Both paths were valid. Both were hers to choose. But only one was true to who she was becoming. Marin had spent her entire life being invisible, being dismissed, being told she was worthless, powerless, nothing. The dungeon had taught her that she was so much more than that. And now the moon itself was offering her the chance to prove it. She reached into the vision, into the offered future, and grasped it with both hands. The power surged. Marin gasped as it flooded through her, not destroying, not consuming, but filling every empty space inside her with light and heat and ancient, unshakable purpose. Her bones sang with it. Her blood ignited. Every scar on her body flared bright as the power raced along the pathways of old pain, transforming trauma into strength. This was what she was meant for. What she'd always been meant for. Not service. Not invisibility. Not quiet acceptance of other people's dismissal. This. The vision released her. Marin stumbled back from the tree, gasping, her whole body glowing so brightly she was almost painful to look at. The clearing had transformed again. Every plant, every stone, every drop of water in the spring blazed with reflected power. The carved symbols on the oak were glowing too, pulsing in time with her heartbeat. And above, visible even though dawn was breaking, the moon hung in the sky. Still red. Still watching. "Well done, daughter," it seemed to whisper. "Well done." Kieran caught her before she fell, his hands steady on her shoulders. The bond flared at the contact, but Marin barely noticed. She was too overwhelmed, too full of vision and power and the absolute certainty that her life had just irrevocably changed. "What did you see?" Kieran's voice was tight, controlled, but she could hear the worry beneath it. Marin tried to answer, but words felt inadequate. How could she explain what she'd just experienced? How could she put into language the weight of centuries, the presence of a goddess, the transformation of her entire understanding of who and what she was? Everything she finally managed. "I saw everything. The first moon chosen. The purge wars. What I could become." Could. Kieran's hands tightened slightly on her shoulders. "Marin, you're glowing bright enough to be seen from Silverbane. I think could has already become is." She looked down at herself and saw he was right. The glow wasn't fading this time. It was settling into her skin, becoming part of her, a constant low-level radiance that pulsed brighter with her emotions. The marks on her palms had changed too. The circles were more defined now, the radiating lines extending up her wrists like delicate silver tattoos. And there was a third mark. She could feel it even though she couldn't see it at the base of her skull, where neck met spine. Another circle, another set of radiating lines, like a crown laid against her skin. The mark of the moon chosen. Complete now. Undeniable. "I can't make it stop," Marin said, and hated how small her voice sounded. The glowing. "I don't know how to turn it off." "You don't turn it off," Kieran said. "You bank it. Like a fire. The power is always there, always burning, but you can control how much shows on the surface." He made it sound simple. Just bank the cosmic force of nature currently trying to pour out of her skin. Sure. Easy. Marin closed her eyes and tried to imagine the power as a fire, tried to picture herself pulling it deeper, containing it beneath her skin instead of letting it radiate outward. Nothing happened. She tried again, focusing harder, willing the glow to dim. Still nothing. Frustration built in her chest, hot and sharp, and the glow immediately intensified in response. "Stop trying to force it," Kieran said quietly. "You're approaching it like an opponent, something to be conquered. The moon-chosen power doesn't work that way. It's not separate from you, it is you. You don't control it any more than you control your own heartbeat. You work with it." "I don't know how to work with it," Maren snapped, her eyes flying open. "I don't know how to do any of this. Yesterday I was a prisoner. Today I'm supposed to be some kind of legendary warrior? It's too much. It's all too much." The clearing pulsed with her agitation, the plants swaying though there was no wind, the spring water rippling in concentric circles. "You're right," Kieran said, and the agreement surprised her enough that she actually looked at him. "It is too much. No one should have to go from what you experienced in the dungeon to this. No one should have their entire identity rewritten in the span of a day. You have every right to be overwhelmed." The acknowledgement of her feelings, the lack of expectation or demand, made something in her chest loosen. But he continued gently, "Being overwhelmed doesn't change the reality. The power is awake. The moon has claimed you. And there are forces hunting you right now that won't care whether you're ready or not. So we work with what we have. We take it one step at a time. One step at a time." The way she'd survived the dungeon, one breath, one moment, one heartbeat at a time. Maren took a shaky breath and tried again, but differently this time. Instead of trying to force the power down, she simply acknowledged it, felt it humming through her veins, accepted that it was part of her now, as integral as her bones. "Hello," she thought at it. "I don't know what I'm doing, but we're apparently stuck with each other, so we might as well figure this out together." The power responded immediately, not with words, but with a feeling of warmth, of welcome, of recognition. Like it had been waiting for her to stop fighting and start listening. Slowly, gradually, the external glow began to dim. Not disappearing, but sinking deeper beneath her skin, becoming a soft radiance instead of a blazing beacon. Within a few moments, she looked almost normal again, if you ignored the faint silver shimmer and the marks on her palms. "Good," Kieran said, and there was genuine pride in his voice. "That's good, Maren." She wanted to snap at him, to tell him she didn't need his approval, but the truth was it felt good to succeed at something. To have even this small measure of control over the chaos her life had become. "The histories mention something," Kieran said after a moment. "About Moon-Chosen and their purpose. Their role." Maren tensed. "What kind of role?" "The moon goddess doesn't grant power randomly. She chooses based on need, when the packs are in danger, when the balance is threatened, when something is coming that requires extraordinary strength to face." He paused. "The red moon is a warning sign. An omen. It means the goddess has awakened a moon-chosen because the world is about to need one." The weight of that settled over Maren like a physical thing. "So something's coming. Something bad enough that the moon decided to torture me for 6 months to create a weapon against it." "Not a weapon," Kieran corrected. "A guardian. A protector. The moon-chosen were never meant to be tools of war, they were meant to be shields. Defenders of those who couldn't defend themselves." The vision had shown her that. The first moon-chosen rising from death not to seek revenge, but to protect her cubs. To stand between the innocent and the darkness. "I don't want to be a shield," Maren said quietly. "I want to be left alone. I want to heal somewhere quiet and never think about pacts or politics or prophecy ever again." "I know." Kieran's voice was soft. "And you can choose that. The power is yours, the moon won't force you to use it in ways you don't want to. But I think you should know what you're walking away from." Maren wanted to tell him she didn't care, that nothing he said would change her mind. But curiosity was a persistent thing, and she found herself asking despite her better judgment. "What am I walking away from?" Kieran was quiet for a long moment, his golden eyes searching hers. "Hope. You're walking away from hope. For every Omega who's ever been dismissed as worthless. For every wolf who doesn't fit the traditional power structure. For everyone who's been told they don't matter because they're not strong enough, not alpha enough, not enough period. The words hit something deep in her chest. You're the first moon chosen in 300 years, he continued. The first proof that power doesn't only belong to the strong, that the moon goddess doesn't only choose alphas, that destiny can find someone in a dungeon and raise them up to stand among kings. If you claim that power, if you let yourself be seen, you become a symbol. Proof that the old hierarchies aren't absolute. That change is possible. Marin's throat tightened. That's not fair. I didn't ask to be a symbol. I didn't ask for any of this. No, Kieran agreed. You didn't. And it's not fair to put that weight on you. But fair stopped mattering the moment Darius framed you for murder. Fair died in the dungeon. Now there's only what is, and what is that you have power that could reshape everything and a choice about what to do with it. She hated that he was right. Hated that she couldn't just walk away and pretend none of this had happened. Hated that some part of her, the part that had spent years being invisible, being dismissed, being treated like she didn't matter, was whispering that maybe this was her chance to prove them all wrong. Not for revenge. Not for glory. But for every other wolf like her, every other person who'd been told they were nothing. I need time, Marin said finally. To think. To figure out what I want, not what everyone else needs from me. Of course, Kieran said immediately. We have until the council assembles, which gives us maybe 2 days before I'm forced to return to Silverbane. You can use that time however you want to train, to rest, to decide what comes next. 2 days. 48 hours to figure out the rest of her life. Better than nothing. Marin looked around the clearing, at the temple that had stood here for a millennium, bearing witness to the rise and fall of her bloodline. The sun was rising now, pale light filtering through the canopy, and the sacred ground was releasing its nighttime glow, returning to something that looked almost normal. Almost. She could still feel the power humming beneath her feet, in the oak's roots, in the spring water. It would always be here, waiting for the next moon chosen to wake it. If there ever was a next one. If Marin survived long enough to pass the bloodline on. Tell me about the prophecy, she said suddenly. You mentioned that the moon chosen appear when something's coming. What's coming? What does the prophecy actually say? Kieran's expression grew troubled. There are several prophecies, actually. Most of them were destroyed during the Purge Wars, but fragments survive. The most complete one is called the Prophecy of the Crimson Moon. It says, when the moon bleeds across the sky, the last daughter will rise from death. She will be marked by suffering, crowned by the goddess, and fated to the wolf who broke her. Together they will stand against the shadow that hungers, or together they will fall, and all the packs will fall with them. The words settled into Marin's bones like they'd been waiting there all along. The last daughter. Marked by suffering. Fated to the wolf who broke her. It was too specific to be coincidence. Too accurate to dismiss. The shadow that hungers, she repeated. What is that? No one knows, Kieran admitted. The prophecies don't elaborate. But there are rumors, old stories about something that existed before the first wolves, something that the moon goddess sealed away when she created our kind. Something that's been waiting all this time for a chance to break free. Perfect. Just perfect. Not only was she a legendary warrior with power she couldn't control, she was also apparently destined to fight some ancient evil that may or may not exist. And she had to do it with her fated mate, the male who'd tortured her. The moon goddess had a twisted sense of humor. I need to learn to fight, Marin said abruptly. If something's coming, if I'm supposed to stand against it, I need to know how to use this power as more than just a glow stick. Kieran's expression shifted into something that might have been relief. I can teach you. The basic principles are similar to normal pack combat, just amplified. And the histories contain techniques that were specific to Moon Chosen, ways to channel the power into offense and defense. Then we start now, Marin said, and felt something settle into place in her chest. Not acceptance, not quite. But determination. The same stubborn refusal to surrender that had kept her alive in the dungeon. Maren turned slowly, trying to pinpoint the source of her unease. The sacred grove had been peaceful all morning, birds singing, sunlight filtering through the canopy, the spring bubbling its endless song. But now the birds had gone silent. The air felt heavy, pressed down by something that made her lungs work harder for each breath. "Everywhere," she whispered. Then the first arrow punched through the tree trunk 3 inches from her head. Kieran moved before the second arrow flew, tackling Maren to the ground and rolling them both behind the massive oak. More arrows followed, a volley of them, whistling through the air with deadly precision, thudding into trees and earth and the space where they'd been standing moments before. "How many?" Maren gasped, pressed flat against the moss with Kieran's body shielding hers. His eyes had gone full wolf, pure molten gold with no white showing. "At least 20. Surrounding us on all sides." He cursed under his breath. "They shouldn't have been able to find us here. The sacred ground should have hidden us from any tracker. Unless their tracker wasn't normal. Unless whatever was hunting them could sense power the same way she could feel the wrongness in the air." The arrows stopped. Silence descended, thick and waiting. Then a voice called out from the trees, male, cultured, dripping with barely concealed contempt. "Alpha King Kieran. How disappointing to find you playing house with a fugitive." Kieran's hands clenched into fists. "Valen," he growled. "I should have known." Maren looked at him sharply. "You know him?" "Alpha of the Eastern Coalition. My political rival and general pain in my ass." Kieran raised his voice, still keeping them both behind cover. "This is pack business, Valen. It doesn't concern you." Laughter echoed through the trees, multiple voices mocking. "Oh, but it does concern us, Kieran. When the moon turns red, when prophecy stirs, it concerns every pack in the territories. You can't keep her to yourself." Maren's blood ran cold. They knew. Somehow, they already knew what she was. "The girl is under my protection," Kieran called back. "Attacking her is the same as attacking me. The girl is an abomination." A new voice, this time female, sharp as broken glass. Moon-chosen bloodlines were purged for a reason. They destabilize the natural order. They corrupt pack hierarchies. They make omegas think they can stand equal to alphas. The venom in those last words made Maren's rage ignite like a struck match. "Show yourself, coward," she shouted before Kieran could stop her. "If you're so confident in your superior alpha status, face me directly instead of hiding in the trees." Kieran shot her a look that was equal parts exasperation and concern, but it was too late. Maren's challenge hung in the air, and pack law was clear. A direct challenge couldn't be ignored without losing face. For a moment, nothing happened. Then figures began emerging from the forest. 20 warriors, just as Kieran had said, all wearing the dark leather and silver insignia of the Eastern Coalition. They formed a loose circle around the clearing, bows lowered, but arrows still nocked, ready to fire at the first sign of aggression. And at the front stood 2 wolves who radiated alpha power like heat from a forge. The male, Valen, was tall and lean, with silver blonde hair and ice blue eyes that held the cold calculation of someone who'd spent his life playing political games. Handsome in a sharp, dangerous way that probably made lesser wolves swoon. Maren hated him on sight. The female beside him was his opposite in coloring, but his equal in presence. Dark hair pulled back in a severe braid, amber eyes that could strip flesh from bone, a face carved from stone and arrogance. She wore authority like armor, every line of her posture screaming dominance. "I am Talia," the female said, and Maren's world tilted. Not Talia. Not the same Talia. Kieran's sister was recovering in Silverbane, poisoned but alive. "Alpha Talia of the Shadow Peak Pack," the female continued, as if reading Maren's confusion. "No relation to your king's unfortunate sibling, though I've been told the shared name causes confusion." Her smile was a knife. "I prefer to think of it as a reminder that Talias are not so easily killed." The implication was clear. The accusation was clear. This female thought Marin had actually tried to murder Kieran's sister. "I didn't poison anyone," Marin said, her voice steady despite the rage building in her chest. "I was framed. There's proof." "Proof provided by the accused is hardly proof at all," Valen cut in smoothly. "You expect us to believe that the Alpha King's most trusted beta orchestrated an elaborate frame against a nobody Omega? For what possible reason? Because she's not a nobody." Kieran had moved to stand beside Marin now, his posture protective but not submissive. "She's Moonchosen, the last of the bloodline." Darius knew what she was and tried to steal her power for himself. The revelation rippled through the gathered warriors. Some looked shocked. Others looked hungry. None looked friendly. "Moonchosen," Talia repeated, tasting the word. "So the rumors are true." The red moon wasn't just a celestial anomaly. It was a beacon. A warning. Her amber eyes fixed on Marin with predatory intensity. "Tell me, little Omega, do you have any idea what you are? What you represent?" "I'm learning," Marin said through gritted teeth. "Allow me to educate you." Talia took a step forward, and immediately Kieran shifted to block her path. She smiled at his protectiveness. The Moonchosen were eradicated because they refused to respect pack hierarchy. They took Omega wolves and elevated them to positions of power. They challenged Alpha authority, disrupted bloodlines, created chaos wherever they went. They believed that the moon's blessing made them superior to those of us who earned our strength through proper channels. Every word was designed to cut, to diminish, to make Marin feel ashamed of what she was. It might have worked a week ago. Before the dungeon. Before she'd learned that shame was just another cage people used to control you. The Moonchosen, Marin said coldly, protected wolves who couldn't protect themselves. They stood between the innocent and the darkness. And they were murdered by alphas who were too insecure to share power with anyone who might challenge them. Talia's eyes flashed. "Careful, Omega. That tongue of yours is writing checks your body can't cash. Stop calling me Omega." The power flared beneath Marin's skin, responding to her anger, making her marks glow visible even in daylight. "I'm not Omega. I never was. I'm exactly what your ancestors were too afraid to let live." The temperature in the clearing dropped. Frost began forming on the grass around Marin's feet, not from cold, but from raw power leaking into the physical world. Kieran's hand found her elbow, studying. A silent reminder, control, not chaos. Valen was watching the display with calculating eyes. Impressive. Untrained, unstable, but impressive nonetheless. Imagine what she could do with proper guidance. Proper leadership. His gaze shifted to Kieran. "You can't seriously intend to keep her for yourself. She's too valuable. Too dangerous. The council should decide her fate, not one alpha acting on personal interest." "Personal interest?" Kieran's voice dropped to a growl. "She's my mate, Valen. The bond is sealed. She's under my protection by right of the moon herself." The admission rippled through the clearing like a shockwave. Marin felt her own surprise even though she'd known, of course she'd known, but hearing Kieran claim her publicly, in front of rival alphas, was different than a private acknowledgement in the dark. Talia laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Your mate. How convenient. How perfectly, politically convenient." The Alpha King discovers his fated mate is also the most powerful bloodline to emerge in 3 centuries. What are the odds? "The moon doesn't care about politics," Kieran said flatly. "The bond is real. Challenge it at your own risk." "Oh, I'm not challenging the bond," Talia said. "I'm challenging your judgment. You're keeping a dangerous, unstable, untrained weapon of mass destruction as a pet because biology says she makes your wolf happy. Meanwhile, the rest of us are supposed to just trust that you'll keep her under control, that she won't snap one day and level a city." "I'm standing right here," Marin interjected. "And I'm not a weapon or a pet. I'm a person. With agency. And opinions." "You're a liability," Talia shot back. "To yourself and everyone around you. The kindest thing we could do is put you down before you hurt someone." The frost around Marin's feet spread rapidly, creeping across the clearing, climbing up the tree trunks. The marks on her palms blazed bright enough to cast shadows in broad daylight. "Try it," Maren heard herself say. "Come at me. Let's see how well your earned strength stands up against moon-blessed power." Kieran's hand tightened on her elbow. "Maren, don't." But it was too late. Talia had already taken the challenge, her own power flaring in response, her eyes shifting to full wolf. Gladly. She moved like lightning, faster than Maren's eyes could track, crossing the clearing in a blur of speed that spoke of years of training and natural alpha gifts. Her hand was aimed for Maren's throat, claws extended, going for the kill. Maren's power erupted on pure instinct. Silver light exploded from her body in a concussive wave that caught Talia mid-leap and sent her flying backward. She hit the ground hard, rolling, coming up in a crouch with shock written across her features. "Impossible," she breathed. "You didn't even shift. You're still human and you." Maren wasn't listening. The power had taken over, riding the wave of adrenaline and rage and fear. It poured out of her in torrents, wild and uncontrolled, responding to the threat by destroying everything in range. The grass beneath her feet turned to ash. The trees groaned as frost and heat warred across their bark. The spring water began to boil. She couldn't stop it. Couldn't bank it the way Kieran had taught her. It was too much, too fast, feeding on her emotions and growing stronger with every passing second. "Maren." Kieran's voice cut through the chaos. "Look at me." She tried to focus on him instead of the 20 warriors who were now backing away in fear, instead of Talia who was staring at her like she was death incarnate, instead of Valen who was shouting orders she couldn't hear over the roaring in her ears. Kieran stepped directly into the maelstrom of her power. The silver light that was disintegrating everything it touched parted around him like water around stone, the bond between them creating a natural shield. He cupped her face in his hands, solid, real, grounding. "Breathe. Just breathe. You're safe. I'm here. Nothing's going to hurt you." "I can't stop it," Maren gasped. "I'm trying, but I can't." "You're not trying to stop it," Kieran said firmly. "You're trying to fight it. Remember what I said? You work with it. Tell the power what you need. Ask it to bank. It will listen." Maren closed her eyes and tried to find the power beneath the panic. It was there, vast and ancient and hers, responding to her fear by trying to eliminate every possible threat within 100 yards. "Please," she thought at it. "Please pull back. I'm safe. We're safe. We don't need to destroy everything." The power hesitated, like a guard dog being called off an intruder. Reluctant but obedient. Slowly, incrementally, the silver light began to recede. The frost stopped spreading. The heat died down. Within moments, Maren was herself again, glowing faintly but no longer a walking apocalypse. She sagged in Kieran's grip, exhausted. The clearing was a disaster. A perfect circle of devastation with Maren at the center, ash and scorched earth and trees that had been flash frozen and then superheated. The warriors had retreated to the forest edge, weapons drawn, eyes wide with fear. Talia had risen to her feet, brushing dirt from her leathers, but her expression had changed. The contempt was still there, but it was tempered now with something that might have been respect. Or might have been greater fear. "Well," Valen said into the silence, his voice remarkably steady. "That was educational." Kieran turned to face the Eastern Coalition Alpha, keeping himself between Maren and the threat. "Satisfied? Or do we need another demonstration?" "Oh, I think we've all seen quite enough," Valen replied. His ice blue eyes were calculating, already running through scenarios and strategies. "The question is, what happens now? You've claimed her as your mate, which gives you some rights under pack law. But she's also a clear danger to public safety. Untrained, unstable, and in possession of power that could level cities. The council will demand she be contained. Controlled." "No." The word came from Maren, surprising even herself. She straightened, pulling away from Kieran's support to stand on her own feet. No one's containing me. No one's controlling me. I've spent enough time in a cage. Then what do you propose? Talia asked, her voice sharp. That we just let you wander free, hoping you don't accidentally genocide a pack the next time someone makes you angry? I propose that you leave. Marin met the female alpha's eyes steadily. This is sacred ground. Moon-blessed territory. You don't have authority here. And I haven't broken any laws. The charges against me were fabricated. The proof exists in Silverbane. So unless you're planning to attack unprovoked and start a war with the Northern Territories, I suggest you take your warriors and go. Talia's jaw clenched. You think you can just dismiss us? We're alphas. We don't take orders from. From what? Marin took a step forward, and the power pulsed in warning. Not threatening, just present. A reminder. From someone blessed by the moon herself? From the bloodline your ancestors tried and failed to completely destroy? From someone who just proved she can defend herself against your best attack without even shifting? The silence that followed was thick with tension. Valen broke it, his voice carrying a note of dark amusement. She has a point, Talia. We did attack first. Technically, she would be within her rights to demand reparations. Talia looked like she'd swallowed glass. This isn't over. I didn't think it would be, Marin said tiredly. But it's over for today. Leave. Now. For a long moment, she thought they might actually fight. Might decide that 20 trained warriors were enough to take down one exhausted Moon Chosen and her conflicted mate. But Valen made a subtle gesture and his warriors began to withdraw. Slowly, reluctantly, but retreating nonetheless. The council meets in 3 days, he said as he turned to leave. In neutral territory, as is tradition when dealing with extraordinary circumstances, the Northern Alpha King will be expected to attend. And to bring his Moon Chosen mate for questioning. She's not some prize to be paraded and examined, Kieran growled. Then don't parade her. But she will be questioned. Her existence changes everything, Kieran. The power balance. The political landscape. The very foundations of pack law. Valen's smile was cold. You can't keep her hidden. The Red Moon made sure of that. So you have 3 days to decide. Are you going to stand with her when the entire council demands her execution? Or are you going to choose your crown over your mate? The question hung in the air like a blade. Kieran's expression went hard as stone. I choose her. Always her. We'll see, Valen said. Then he vanished into the trees, Talia and the warriors following like shadows. The clearing felt cavernous in their absence. Marin's legs gave out, dumping her unceremoniously onto the scorched grass. The exhaustion hit all at once, physical, emotional, the massive drain of channeling that much power with no training. Kieran was beside her in an instant. Are you hurt? Just tired. She looked at the devastation she'd caused, at the proof of what she could do when pushed. I almost killed them. If I hadn't been able to stop it, if the power had kept growing. But you did stop it, Kieran said firmly. You controlled it when it mattered most. That's what counts. Marin shook her head. Talia was right. I'm dangerous. Unstable. A liability to everyone around me. The words tasted like ash. Maybe they should contain me. Maybe it would be safer for everyone if I was locked away somewhere I couldn't hurt anyone. Don't. Kieran's hands found her shoulders, turning her to face him. Don't let them put that weight on you. You're not dangerous because you have power. You're dangerous because you've been hurt and haven't learned to channel that pain yet. There's a difference. Is there? Marin's laugh was bitter. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like I traded one cage for another. The dungeon for the prophecy. Chains for destiny. At least before, I knew my limits. Knew what I was and wasn't capable of. Now I don't even know if I'm safe to be around. You are. The certainty in Kieran's voice should have been comforting. Instead, it just made her angry. How can you say that? You saw what just happened. I lost control. Completely. If you hadn't been there to pull me back. If I hadn't been there, you would have figured it out on your own, Kieran interrupted. You're stronger than you think, Marin. Stronger than anyone I've ever met. And you're not alone in this. I meant what I said to Valen. I choose you. No matter what the council says. No matter what it costs. The declaration should have made the bond sing. Should have filled her with warmth and gratitude and maybe the first stirrings of forgiveness. Instead, it made her furious. You don't get to do that, Marin snapped, pulling away from his touch. You don't get to make grand declarations about choosing me when I never asked to be chosen. When the only reason we're in this mess is because you chose to believe the worst of me 6 months ago. Kieran flinched like she'd struck him. Good. Let him hurt. Let him understand that words weren't enough to fix what he'd broken. I know I failed you, he said quietly. I know I don't deserve your trust or your forgiveness. But I'm trying. Trying isn't enough. Marin was on her feet now, power crackling beneath her skin in response to her agitation. Do you know what the worst part is? It's not the scars. It's not the nightmares. It's not even the 6 months of torture. It's that the universe looked at everything that happened and decided you were my perfect match. My fated mate. The one person who's supposed to understand me better than anyone else in the world. Tears were burning in her eyes now, hot and angry. And I hate it. I hate the bond. I hate that it makes me want to trust you when I know better. I hate that some part of me wants to lean into your promises and believe them even though you've already proven you can't be trusted. I hate that I'm tied to you forever when all I want is to be free. The words hung between them like broken glass. Kieran looked like she'd reached into his chest and torn his heart out. The bond between them, usually a warm hum, felt like an open wound, bleeding pain in both directions. I'm sorry, he said finally, his voice barely a whisper. I'm so sorry, Marin. For all of it. And you're right, trying isn't enough. Nothing I do will ever be enough to make up for what you suffered because of my failure. But I'm still going to try. Because the alternative is giving up on you, and I won't do that. Even if you never forgive me. Even if you hate me for the rest of our lives. I'll still be here, trying to be worthy of a bond one know I don't deserve. Marin wanted to yell at him more. Wanted to rage and scream and make him understand the depths of her betrayal. But she was so tired. So achingly, impossibly tired. I need space, she said instead. From you. From this. From everything. Just leave me alone for a while. Pain flickered across Kieran's face, but he nodded. I'll be at the edge of the clearing if you need me. But I'm not leaving you unprotected. Not with Valen and Talia out there. Marin wanted to argue that she could protect herself, but recent events suggested otherwise. Fine. Just not close. Please. Kieran rose and walked toward the far side of the clearing without another word. Giving her the space she'd demanded even though the bond was screaming at him to stay close, to comfort, to fix what was broken between them. Marin watched him go and felt something in her chest crack wider. She was the last moon chosen. The weapon the world both needed and feared. Tied by fate to a male who'd destroyed her. Hunted by alphas who wanted her power or her death. Expected to stand before a council in 3 days and defend her right to exist. And she was so alone. The moon, pale and distant in the daylight sky, seemed to pulse once, as if acknowledging her pain. No comfort. No answers. Just distant, celestial observation. Marin drew her knees to her chest and let herself feel it all, the rage, the fear, the overwhelming sense that she was drowning in expectations and prophecies and a destiny she never asked for. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. Not a tracker this time. Just a wild creature calling to its pack. Marin had no pack. Had no one who would answer if she howled. Just a bond she didn't want, a power she couldn't fully control, and 3 days to decide whether she was going to fight for the right to exist or surrender to the fear that she was exactly the monster they all believed her to be. The sacred ground hummed beneath her, patient and eternal, waiting to see what she would choose. The hours passed in silence. Marin stayed where she was, curled against the base of the ancient oak, watching the light change as afternoon gave way to evening. The sacred grove transformed around her, shadows lengthening, the temperature dropping, night-blooming flowers beginning to open their glowing petals one by one. Kieran remained at the edge of the clearing, exactly where he'd said he would be. Not approaching, not speaking, just present, a solid shadow against the darkening trees, keeping watch. The bond hummed between them, not demanding, not pulling, just there. A constant reminder that no matter how much distance she put between them physically, they were still connected on a level that transcended space and choice, and even her considerable anger. It should have felt like a prison. Another cage to replace the dungeon. Instead, it felt like an anchor. Something solid in a world that had become nothing but chaos and impossible choices. Maren hated that she found comfort in it. As twilight deepened into true night, her stomach made its displeasure known with a long, embarrassing growl. She'd been running on moon-blessed water and adrenaline for over a day now. The power inside her had been feeding her strength, keeping her moving when her body should have collapsed, but it couldn't replace actual food indefinitely. She heard movement from across the clearing, careful, deliberate, giving her plenty of warning. Kieran approached slowly, carrying something wrapped in broad leaves. He stopped a respectful distance away. "You need to eat." "I'm fine," Maren lied. "You're running on fumes and stubbornness." There was no judgment in his voice, just observation. The power will only sustain you for so long before it starts consuming you instead. "Please, eat." He set the leaf-wrapped bundle on the ground halfway between them, then retreated back to his position without waiting for a response. Maren stared at the offering for a long moment, pride warring with practicality. Finally, practicality won. She crawled forward and unwrapped the leaves to find wild berries, edible roots that had been cleaned, and what looked like honeycomb. Simple food. Gathered, not hunted. Nothing that would require fire or preparation or her to feel indebted to his skill. The thoughtfulness of it made something in her chest ache. She ate slowly, savoring each bite. The berries were tart and sweet, the roots earthy and filling, the honey like liquid gold on her tongue. It wasn't much, but it was the first real food she'd had since before the dungeon, and her body responded with desperate gratitude. When she'd finished, she felt almost human again. Stronger. More centered. "Thank you," she said quietly, not looking at him. "You're welcome." More silence. The spring bubbled its eternal song. An owl called from somewhere deep in the forest. The night pressed close, intimate, and vast all at once. "I need to check your wounds," Kieran said after a while. "The ones from the dungeon. The moon-blessed water and the power awakening will have accelerated healing, but infection is still possible. Especially the deeper ones." Maren's hands automatically went to her ribs, where the worst of the damage was. "I'm fine, Maren." There was no force in the way he said her name, just quiet persistence. "I know you don't want me near you. I know you don't trust me. But I also know what untreated wounds in sacred places can do. The accelerated healing sometimes seals infection inside instead of purging it. Please, let me look." She wanted to refuse. Wanted to maintain her distance, her walls, her absolute determination not to let him close enough to hurt her again. But the healer training she'd received years ago whispered that he was right. Accelerated healing was dangerous if the wound wasn't clean. And she couldn't check her own back, couldn't see the damage the whip had done. "Fine," she said through gritted teeth. "But if you try anything, I won't." Kieran rose and approached, moving with exaggerated care, like she was a wild animal that might bolt at any moment. "I'm just going to look. That's all. I swear it." Maren turned her back to him and carefully pulled what remained of her shift aside, exposing the ruined landscape of her shoulders and spine. She heard his sharp intake of breath, felt the bond flood with his horror and rage and grief. "Don't," she said sharply. "Don't pity me. Don't make sounds like that. Just look and tell me if anything needs treatment." Kieran was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, His voice was rough. May I touch? To check for heat, for signs of infection. Every instinct screamed to say no. But the healer in her knew it was necessary. Yes. His fingers were gentle as they traced the edges of the scars, so gentle she barely felt them. Careful not to press too hard, not to cause unnecessary pain. He worked methodically, checking each mark, each place where silver and iron had carved their lessons into her flesh. This one on your left shoulder blade is warm, he said quietly. Not infected yet, but close. And there's one along your ribs that didn't seal properly. I need to clean them. I have supplies, medicinal herbs that grow near the spring. They'll hurt, but they'll prevent infection. Maren nodded, not trusting her voice. Kieran withdrew to gather what he needed. Maren used the time to rebuild her walls, to remind herself that his gentleness now didn't erase his cruelty then, that she couldn't let her guard down just because he was being kind. He returned with leaves and moss and water cupped in his hands, all glowing faintly with the moon-blessed quality of the sacred spring. This will sting, he warned. It did more than sting. The first application of the crushed herbs felt like being branded all over again. Maren bit down on her lip hard enough to taste blood, refusing to give him the satisfaction of hearing her cry out. But Kieran must have felt it through the bond, because his hands hesitated. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I can stop if... Don't stop, Maren gritted out. Just finish it. He worked as quickly as he could while still being thorough, cleaning the wounds that needed attention, applying the healing herbs, murmuring apologies under his breath that she pretended not to hear. When he finally finished, Maren felt scraped raw, not physically, but emotionally. There was something deeply intimate about letting someone tend to wounds they'd indirectly caused. About being vulnerable in front of the person who'd proven he could hurt you. Done, Kieran said softly, retreating to give her space. They should heal clean now. Maren pulled her shift back into place and turned to face him. He was kneeling a few feet away, his hands stained with her blood and the green of crushed herbs, his expression carved from guilt and something that looked like devastation. Why? The question escaped before she could stop it. Why are you doing this? Being kind, playing healer, acting like you care? Is it guilt? Obligation? The bond forcing you to protect me even though you don't actually want to. Kieran's golden eyes met hers steadily. I'm doing this because you deserve care. Because you've been hurt enough. And because whether you believe it or not, I do care. Not because of the bond just made me see what should have been obvious from the beginning. That you matter. That your pain matters. That I failed someone who deserved protection, and I can't undo that, but I can try to do better going forward. The honesty in his voice made her want to believe him. Made the traitorous part of her that still remembered what hope felt like whisper that maybe, just maybe, he was telling the truth. Tell me something, Maren said abruptly. Something real. Something that costs you to share. Because I've given you everything, you've seen my scars, you know my shame, you've witnessed me at my absolute lowest. But I don't know you. Not really. Just the Alpha King who sentenced me. The mate who failed me. I don't know the person beneath the crown. Kieran was quiet for so long she thought he might refuse. Then he moved to sit against the oak opposite her, mirroring her position, the spring bubbling between them like a barrier. My father died when I was 16, he said finally. Killed in a challenge by a rival alpha who thought our pack had grown too weak to defend our territory. The fight lasted 3 hours. I watched all of it. Watched my father bleed out in the fighting circle while the council ruled I was too young to intervene, that pack law demanded the challenge be honored. Maren had known Kieran's father was dead. It was common knowledge that he'd taken the crown young, but she'd never heard the details. The rival alpha's name was Magnus, Kieran continued, his voice distant with memory. And when my father finally fell, when Magnus stood over his body and claimed victory, I challenged him. Right there, covered in my father's blood, barely old enough to complete a full shift. The council tried to stop me, said I'd be killed, that I should wait until I was trained. But I didn't care. All I cared about was making him pay. his hands clenched into fists. We fought. I was faster than Magnus expected, more desperate, more willing to take damage if it meant landing a hit. And I won. Barely. I tore his throat out with my own teeth and felt nothing but satisfaction as he died. The image was visceral, violent. A boy becoming a killer to avenge his father. The council crowned me 3 days later, Kieran said. Youngest Alpha King in 5 generations. They said I was strong. Worthy. Blessed by the moon to achieve such a victory. And I believed them. I wore the crown and told myself I was ready, that I could lead, that I was strong enough for the responsibility. He looked at her then, and his eyes held oceans of regret. But I wasn't ready. I was a traumatized child playing at leadership, surrounded by advisors who had their own agendas. And the only person who seemed to genuinely care about me, who'd been my friend since childhood, was Darius. So I trusted him. Completely. I made him my beta and let him guide me, let him make decisions when I was overwhelmed, let him be the stability I desperately needed. Understanding dawned. You were dependent on him. I was. Kieran's voice was barely a whisper. And he knew it. He cultivated that dependence, made himself indispensable, positioned himself as the only person I could truly trust. For years, it worked. The pack thrived. I grew into my role. Everything seemed perfect. Until he showed you his real face, Marin finished. Until he showed me that I'd been a useful fool all along. That he'd been playing a long game I didn't even know existed. Kieran's laugh was bitter. When he confessed, when I confronted him with the evidence I'd found, and he admitted everything, do you know what he said? He said I should be thanking him. That by framing you, by forcing your power to manifest, he'd given me the most valuable mate in the world. That I could use your power to secure my rule for generations. The casual cruelty of it made Marin's stomach turn. I killed him for that, Kieran said flatly. Or I would have if my guards hadn't stopped me. He's in the dungeon now, in the same cell where you suffered, and part of me hopes he rots there. The other part wants him alive so I can make him stand trial, so the whole world can see what he did. What I allowed him to do because I was too blind, too trusting, too dependent on the one person who was slowly poisoning everything I'd built. He met her eyes. You asked why I'm being kind. Part of it is guilt, I won't lie about that. But the other part is that you're the first person in my entire reign who's been completely, brutally honest with me. You don't want anything from me. Don't care about my title or my power or what I can do for you. You just want me to acknowledge the truth that I failed you. That I'm not the infallible Alpha King. That I'm just a man who makes mistakes and has to live with the consequences. The vulnerability in his confession was staggering. This wasn't the Alpha King speaking, this was just Kieran, stripped of pretense, offering her the same raw honesty she'd given him. I'm afraid, Marin heard herself admit. All the time. Of the power, of what I might do with it, of becoming the monster everyone thinks I am. But more than that, I'm afraid of hoping. Of letting myself believe things could be different. Because every time I've hoped, every time I've trusted, I've been hurt. My pack, my brother, you, everyone I've ever counted on has proven that I was right to keep my walls up, to expect nothing, to protect myself first. I know, Kieran said softly. And now the bond is telling me to trust you. To give you another chance. To believe that this time will be different. Marin's voice cracked. But I don't know how. I don't know how to let someone in when every instinct is screaming that it's a trap, that I'll be hurt again, that hoping is just another way to break. Kieran was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, he extended his hand across the space between them, not reaching for her, just offering. Palm up, open, marked with the same herb stains that came from tending her wounds. You don't have to know how, he said. You don't have to trust me completely or forgive me or even like me. You just have to let me prove, one day at a time, one moment at a time, that I see you. All of you. The Omega who was dismissed. The prisoner who survived. The Moon Chosen who's terrified of her own power. The woman who's stronger than anyone I've ever met. even though she doesn't believe it yet. Maren stared at his offered hand. It would be so easy to take it, to let the bond pull them together, to accept the comfort he was offering. It would also be terrifying. A surrender of the walls that had kept her safe, kept her whole, kept her from completely breaking in the dark. I can't promise I won't hurt you again, Kieran continued. I'm imperfect. I'll make mistakes. But I can promise that I'll never stop trying to be worthy of you. And I can promise that if you give me a chance, just one real chance, I'll spend every day proving that you're not alone anymore. The night pressed close around them, intimate and vast. The spring sang its eternal song. The moon, no longer red but returned to silver, watched from above. Maren looked at Kieran's hand, at the offer implicit in the gesture, and felt something shift in her chest. Not forgiveness, she wasn't ready for that, might never be ready for that. But maybe, possibility. The smallest crack in the wall she'd built. She didn't take his hand. But she didn't pull further away either. Tell me about the council, she said instead, deflecting. What happens in 3 days? If Kieran was disappointed, he didn't show it. He simply withdrew his hand and answered her question. The council is made up of representatives from every major pack in the territories. Alphas mostly, but also betas and advisors. They meet to settle disputes, make laws, deal with threats that affect multiple packs. And they're going to see me as a threat, Maren said. Some will. Others will see you as an opportunity. A weapon to be controlled and aimed at their enemies. And a very few, might see you as what you actually are. Which is a person, Kieran said simply. Someone with power, yes, but also with agency and rights and the ability to choose her own path. Someone who deserves protection, not persecution. Maren laughed bitterly. You really think the council is going to see it that way? After what happened with Valen and Talia? After I almost leveled this clearing because I couldn't control my temper? I think the council is going to see what we show them, Kieran said. If we walk in with you shackled and treated like a prisoner, they'll see a threat to be contained. But if we walk in with you as my equal, my mate, my partner, someone with full rights and agency, some of them might follow that lead. And the ones who don't? We deal with them. Kieran's expression hardened. I'm not going to let them hurt you, Maren. I don't care if I have to stand against the entire council. I don't care if it costs me the crown. I won't let them cage you again. The fierce protectiveness in his voice made the bond sing. Made that traitorous part of her want to close the distance between them, to accept what he was offering. You can't promise that, Maren said. You don't know what they'll do. What they'll demand. No, Kieran agreed. But I know what I'll do. I'll stand with you. Fight for you if I have to. And if the worst happens, if they decide execution is the only answer, I'll get you out. Even if it means becoming a traitor to my own people. The declaration hung between them, heavy with the weight of oaths that could destroy everything he'd built. Why? Maren whispered. Why would you give up everything for someone you barely know? Someone who hates you? Kieran was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was raw with emotion. Because you're my mate. Because the moon chose you for me, and I have to believe that means something. Because I've spent 10 years being the Alpha King, making decisions for the good of the pack, sacrificing my own happiness for duty. And I'm tired, Maren. I'm so tired of being alone. Of having no one I can trust, no one who sees me as anything other than a crown and a title. He looked at her, and the vulnerability in his eyes made her breath catch. You see me. You see all my failures, all my flaws, all the ways I've fallen short. And you hate me for them, yes, but at least it's honest. At least it's real. And I'd rather have your honest hatred than the false worship of everyone else. The confession stripped him bare in a way that had nothing to do with clothing or physical vulnerability. This was soul-deep nakedness, the kind that came from admitting truths you'd never said aloud. Maren felt her walls crack a little wider. I don't completely hate you, she admitted, the words costing her. I want to. It would be easier if I did. But the bond won't let me. And there are moments, like now, like when you're being honest instead of playing the alpha king, where I almost like you. Which makes everything more complicated. Kieran's expression shifted into something that might have been hope. Complicated I can work with. Complicated means there's still a chance. A chance for what? Maren asked. We're bound by fate to someone we barely know. Tied together by biology and prophecy and circumstances neither of us asked for. What exactly are we supposed to do with that? We could try, Kieran said softly. Not to fix everything at once or force something that isn't ready. But just try. To know each other. To see if there's something real beneath the bond. To find out who we could be if we gave ourselves permission to be more than just our worst moments. Maren wanted to say no. Wanted to maintain her anger, her distance, her absolute refusal to let him close enough to hurt her again. But she was so tired of being alone. So tired of walls and rage and the constant vigilance required to keep everyone at arm's length. I can't promise anything, she said finally. I can't promise I'll ever fully trust you or forgive you or be the mate the bond says I should be. But I can try. To know you. To see if there's something worth salvaging beneath all the pain. It wasn't acceptance. Wasn't forgiveness. But it was more than she'd been willing to offer an hour ago. Kieran's entire posture softened with relief. That's enough. More than enough. Thank you. The gratitude in his voice made something in her chest ache. They sat in silence for a while, the tension between them shifting from hostile to something gentler. Not comfortable, they were too far from that, but bearable. Almost peaceful. The moon is beautiful tonight, Kieran said eventually, looking up at the silver orb hanging above them. I used to come to sacred places like this when I was younger. Before the crown. Before everything got complicated. I'd just sit and watch the moon and feel connected to something larger than myself. Maren followed his gaze. The moon was nearly full, luminous and serene, unmarred by the red that had stained it the night before. Do you miss it? She asked. Being just Kieran instead of the Alpha King? Every day, he admitted. The crown is heavy. Not the physical crown, though that thing gives me headaches, but the weight of responsibility. Every decision affects thousands of lives. Every mistake has consequences that ripple outward. Sometimes I dream about being nobody again. Just a wolf who can run through the forest and howl at the moon without it being a political statement. The longing in his voice resonated with something deep in Maren's chest. She'd spent years trying to be somebody, trying to matter. And he'd spent years wishing he could be nobody, could escape the burden of mattering too much. We're quite a pair, she said wryly. The Omega who wanted to be seen and the Alpha who wants to hide. Kieran's laugh was surprised but genuine. When you put it that way, maybe the moon knew what she was doing. Matching the invisible with the inescapable. Balance. Maybe. Or maybe the moon just had a twisted sense of humor. Maren found herself studying him in the moonlight, really looking at him for the first time without the filter of rage or fear. He was handsome, objectively. Strong features, golden eyes that reflected light like a wolf's, dark hair that was trying to curl at the ends despite being pushed back. But it was the exhaustion etched into his face that caught her attention. The subtle signs of someone who carried too much weight for too long. He looked as tired as she felt. What are you thinking? Kieran asked, catching her staring. That you look exhausted, Maren said honestly. When was the last time you actually rested? I've been keeping watch. Making sure no one else tries to attack while you sleep. You can't guard me 24 hours a day, Maren pointed out. Eventually you'll collapse. I'll manage. That's not managing, that's martyrdom. She surprised herself by patting the ground beside her. Sleep. A few hours at least. I'll keep watch. Kieran looked stunned. You're offering to watch over me while I sleep? Don't make it weird, Maren said, though she felt heat creep into her cheeks. You need rest. And I'm too wired to sleep anyway after everything that happened today. So stop being stubborn and accept help when it's offered. For a moment, she thought he might refuse. Then his shoulders sagged with relief, and he moved to settle near her, close enough that the bond hummed with satisfaction, but not so close that he invaded her space. "Wake me if anything happens," he said, already sounding half asleep. "I will." Kieran's breathing evened out within minutes, exhaustion claiming him the moment he gave himself permission to rest. Maren watched him sleep, this complicated male who'd destroyed her and was now trying to piece her back together. Without thinking, she found her hand moving toward his face, fingers hovering just above his cheek. So close she could feel his warmth, but not quite touching. The bond urged her to close that last inch of distance. To touch, to connect, to accept what they could be to each other. But that was a step too far. A vulnerability she wasn't ready for. Maren withdrew her hand and turned her attention to the forest, keeping watch as promised. But she remained close enough that she could hear Kieran's steady breathing, could feel the bond pulsing between them like a shared heartbeat. And for the first time since the dungeon, she didn't feel completely alone. It wasn't trust. Wasn't forgiveness. Wasn't anything close to the mate bond in its full glory. But it was something. And maybe, just maybe, something was enough to start with. The moon watched over them both as the night deepened, and the sacred grove held them safe in its ancient embrace. The summons came at dawn on the third day. Maren woke to the sound of horses and the metallic clink of armor, official sounds, the kind that preceded formal declarations and things that couldn't be ignored. She was on her feet instantly, power flaring beneath her skin in automatic defense. Kieran was already awake, standing at the edge of the clearing with his body positioned between her and whoever was approaching. His posture was alpha-rigid, but she could feel the tension thrumming through the bond. Whatever this was, he'd been expecting it, dreading it. 3 riders emerged from the forest, bearing the silver and blue banners of the Northern Territories Council. Not warriors, these were messengers selected specifically because attacking them would be a violation of sacred law. Neutral ground. Neutral parties. Untouchable. The lead messenger dismounted with practiced efficiency, withdrawing a scroll sealed with wax that bore the mark of the Council's collective authority. Every major alpha in the territories had pressed their sigil into that seal. This wasn't a request. It was a command. The messenger's voice carried the formal cadence of official proclamation. By order of the Territorial Council, Alpha King Kieran of Silverbane and the individual known as Maren, accused of crimes against the pack and bearing the suspected mark of the Moon-chosen bloodline, are hereby summoned to appear before the full council at sunset today. Failure to appear will result in declarations of outlawry and the forfeiture of all pack protections and rights. Maren's blood ran cold. Today. Not tomorrow. Not the 3 days Valen had mentioned. They'd moved the timeline, which meant something had changed. Something had forced their hand. Kieran's jaw clenched, but his voice remained controlled. "We'll be there." The messenger's eyes flicked to Maren, curiosity and fear warring in his expression. She knew what he saw, a gaunt female in tattered clothing, marked palms glowing faintly even in daylight, standing in the ruins of a clearing that bore witness to her loss of control. Dangerous. Unstable. Other. She lifted her chin and met his gaze steadily, refusing to cower. The messenger looked away first. "The council convenes at the Gathering Stones. Neutral territory. You have until sunset." He remounted his horse, and the 3 riders departed as quickly as they'd come, leaving only the scroll and the weight of inevitability behind. Kieran broke the seal and read the scroll in silence. Maren watched his expression darken with each line, watched his hands tighten until the parchment crumpled at the edges. "What does it say?" she asked, though part of her didn't want to know. "Formal charges. 5 counts of assault with intent to kill. 3 counts of using forbidden magic. 2 counts of threatening pack hierarchy. 1 count of attempted regicide." His voice was flat, drained of emotion. "They're throwing everything at you. Building a case that justifies execution." Execution. The word hung in the air like a blade. "Valen," Maren said. "He did this. Moved the timeline, stacked the charges, made sure the council would see me as a threat before I even walked into the room. Yes. Kieran's hands were shaking with barely suppressed rage. And there's more. The council has called additional witnesses. People who can testify to your character, your history, your potential danger to pack society. The way he said it made dread pool in Marin's stomach. Who? Kieran looked at her, and the pity in his eyes was worse than any anger could have been. Your brother, Torrin of Moonridge. He's been summoned to testify about your behavior before you came to Silverbane. About why your original pack was willing to let you leave. The ground tilted beneath Marin's feet. Torrin, her brother. The one who'd called her a coward, who'd disowned her after the rogue attacks, who'd made it clear she was a burden their pack couldn't afford. He was going to stand in front of the council and tell them she'd always been worthless. Always been a problem. Always been something to be discarded. I can't do this, Marin heard herself say. I can't stand there and listen to my own brother confirm that I'm nothing. That I've always been nothing. You're not nothing, Kieran said fiercely, crossing to her. I'm moon-chosen, I know. I have power now. I matter now because I'm useful as a weapon or a threat. The bitterness in her voice was acid. But that's not who I am. That's just what woke up inside me because I was tortured past my breaking point. Strip away the power and I'm still just the Omega nobody wanted. The sister who disappointed her family. The servant who got blamed for a crime she didn't commit. That's not true. It is true. The power flared, responding to her anguish, making the air around her shimmer. You think the council is going to care that I survived the dungeon? That I didn't break when anyone else would have? All they're going to see is what Torrin will tell them, that I was always weak. Always useless. Always the kind of wolf who hides while others die. The old shame, the old wound, split open fresh and bleeding. All the work she'd done in the past 3 days, the tentative trust, the small steps toward believing she might be more than her worst moments, crumbled under the weight of knowing her own blood would condemn her. Kieran reached for her, but Marin stepped back. Don't. I need to think. Marin, we have hours before sunset. We can prepare, we can. Prepare for what? For my brother to confirm everything the council already believes? There's no preparing for that. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the summer morning. Maybe they're right. Maybe I am too dangerous. Too unstable. Maybe execution would be a mercy. Don't you dare. Kieran's voice cracked like a whip. Don't you dare give up now. Not after everything you've survived. Why not? Marin looked at him with eyes that felt too dry, too empty. What exactly am I fighting for, Kieran? The right to be hunted for the rest of my life? The privilege of being seen as a weapon instead of a person? The joy of knowing my own family thinks I'm worthless. You're fighting for yourself, Kieran said desperately. For the right to exist. For the future you could have if you'd just. If I just what? Accept the bond? Fall in love with my torturer? Become the symbol everyone wants me to be. She laughed, and it sounded broken even to her own ears. I'm so tired, Kieran. I'm tired of fighting. Tired of being afraid. Tired of trying to be strong when all I want is to disappear. The confession hung between them, raw and honest and utterly devastating. Before Kieran could respond, Marin turned and walked into the forest. She half expected him to follow, to use the bond or his alpha authority to stop her. He didn't. He let her go, and somehow that was worse. Marin walked until she couldn't feel the sacred grove's power anymore, until she was deep in the wild woods where only animal trails marked the earth. She walked until her legs ached and her lungs burned, and the physical pain distracted from the emotional agony. Then she collapsed against a tree and let herself break. No tears came. She'd cried herself dry in the dungeon, had wrung every drop of salt water from her body during those endless days. But the grief was there anyway, silent and vast, an ocean that lived inside her chest. Torrin, her brother. The one person she'd thought might still care about her somewhere beneath the disappointment and shame. He was going to stand in front of the council and destroy her. And the worst part was, she couldn't even blame him. Everything he would say was true from his perspective. She had hidden during the rogue attacks. She had been weak and powerless and useless. She had failed to be the kind of wolf the pack needed. That none of it was her fault, that she'd been born without the ability to shift through no choice of her own, that she'd done the best she could with what she'd been given. None of that would matter. The council would hear that she'd always been a problem. Always been someone who didn't fit. And they would use that to justify whatever they'd already decided to do with her. Maren pressed her marked palms against the rough bark of the tree, feeling the power pulse beneath her skin. So much power. Enough to level cities, to challenge alphas, to reshape pack society. And it meant nothing. Changed nothing. Because at her core, she was still the scared girl who'd hidden while people died. Still the disappointment who'd driven her own brother to disown her. Still the Omega who'd never been enough. The power had only changed the outside. The inside was still broken. A twig snapped behind her. Maren whirled, power flaring in automatic defense, ready to unleash devastation on whoever had followed her. But it wasn't Kieran. It wasn't anyone from the Eastern Coalition or the Council's messengers or even a random tracker who'd gotten lucky. It was a male she'd spent years trying to forget. Tall and broad-shouldered, with the same dark hair and green eyes she saw every time she looked in a reflective surface. Older now, harder, carrying the scars of someone who'd seen combat and survived. Torrens stood at the edge of the small clearing, dressed in the formal leathers of a pack enforcer, and looked at his sister like she was a stranger. "Hello, Maren," he said quietly. She couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. The shock of seeing him here, now, before the council meeting, shorted out every coherent thought. "What are you doing here?" The words came out harsh, defensive. "I came early. Wanted to talk to you before everything." Torren took a careful step forward, hands visible and empty. "I heard what happened. The Red Moon. The Moon-chosen bloodline. It's all anyone in the packs can talk about. And you came to confirm that I'm exactly the disappointment you always thought I was," Maren finished bitterly. Pain flickered across Torren's face. "Is that really what you think? That I came here to hurt you? Why else would you be here? The council summoned you to testify against me. To tell them I've always been weak, always been a coward, always been worthless. To help them justify killing me. I was summoned, yes," Torren admitted. "But not by my choice. And not to say what you think I'm going to say." Maren laughed bitterly. "So you're going to stand up there and defend me? Tell them I'm actually brave and strong and worthy? Forget everything you said after the rogue attacks? Pretend you didn't disown me?" Torren flinched. "I was angry. Grieving. We just lost half the pack and You blamed me. The old wound, the old pain, poured out. You looked at me and saw someone who should have fought. Should have died trying. And when I couldn't do that, when I survived by hiding, you decided I wasn't your sister anymore. I was wrong." The admission came out rough, forced through a throat that clearly didn't want to release it. "I was wrong, Maren. About all of it. And I've spent 3 years knowing I was wrong and being too proud, too ashamed, to come find you and say it. The words should have meant something. Should have healed the wound, or at least taken the edge off the pain. Instead, they just made her angry." 3 years, Maren said flatly. "You've known you were wrong for 3 years. You knew where I was. Silverbane isn't exactly hidden. You could have come at any time. Could have sent a letter. Could have done anything except wait until I was publicly accused of murder and facing execution to suddenly develop a conscience." Torren's hands clenched at his sides. I know the timing is terrible. But when I heard what happened, when I heard you'd been in a dungeon for 6 months and I didn't know, didn't help, his voice broke. I couldn't live with myself. Couldn't let you face the council thinking you had no one." "I don't have anyone," Maren said. "I've been alone since the day you told me I wasn't worth calling sister. And I survived. I learned to stand on my own. I don't need you to ease your guilt by playing the supportive brother now. It's not about guilt. Yes, it is. The power exploded from her, not in violence, but in anguish, making the trees groan and the ground tremble. It's all about guilt. You feel bad about abandoning me, so now you want to swoop in and fix things. Make yourself feel better by defending me to the council. Absolve yourself of the sin of being a terrible brother by playing hero at the last possible moment. Torrin weathered the storm of her power without flinching, which somehow made her angrier. He should be afraid. Should be running. Should be anything except standing there looking at her with pity and regret. You have power now, he said quietly. Real power. The kind that makes alphas nervous. And I'm proud of you for that. Proud that you survived long enough to discover what you really are. Don't. The word came out as a snarl. Don't you dare be proud of me. You don't get to be disappointed when I'm powerless and proud when I'm dangerous. You don't get to pick and choose which version of me is worth acknowledging. I'm not picking and choosing. I'm trying to tell you that I see you. All of you. And I'm sorry I didn't see it before. Sorry doesn't fix anything, Marin said, and felt the truth of it settle into her bones. Sorry doesn't give me back the 3 years I spent thinking my own blood had rejected me. Sorry doesn't erase the nights I cried myself to sleep in the dungeon thinking I was completely alone in the world. Sorry is just a word you're using to make yourself feel better. Torrin looked like she'd struck him. Good. Let him hurt. Let him carry a fraction of what she'd carried. What do you want from me? He asked finally. Tell me what you need, and I'll do it. Anything. I want you to leave. Marin's voice was cold, empty. I want you to go back to Moonridge and forget you ever had a sister. I want you to tell the council whatever you were going to tell them, and then disappear from my life permanently. Because I don't need you. I don't need anyone who only values me when I'm powerful enough to be worth noticing. Marin, please. Go. The power flared again, more controlled this time, but no less dangerous. Get out of my sight before I do something we'll both regret. For a long moment, Torrin just stood there, looking like he wanted to argue, to fight, to force her to hear him out. Then his shoulders sagged in defeat. I'll do what you ask. I'll leave. But I want you to know, whether you believe it or not, whether you want to hear it or not, that I love you. I've always loved you. And I'm sorry I let fear and pride and stupidity make me lose sight of that. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the forest without another word. Marin stood alone in the clearing, trembling with rage and grief and 1,000 other emotions she couldn't name. She'd sent away the only family she had left. Had rejected his apology, his offer to help, his claim of love. And she didn't regret it. Couldn't regret it. Because accepting it, believing it, would mean opening herself up to hope again. And hope was the most dangerous thing she could possibly allow herself to feel. The sun was setting by the time Marin made her way to the gathering stones. She'd spent the hours since Torrin's departure walking, thinking, trying to find some clarity in the chaos of her emotions. She'd found none. Just exhaustion and resignation and the grim determination to face whatever was coming with her walls firmly in place. Kieran had been waiting at the sacred grove's edge, worry etched into every line of his face. He'd tried to talk to her, to ask what happened, to offer support. Marin had walked past him without a word. If she started talking, started explaining, she might actually break. And she needed to be hard as stone to survive what was coming. The gathering stones lived up to their name, massive megaliths arranged in a circle, ancient beyond measure, carved with symbols that predated Pack history. Neutral ground, blessed by the moon, where Pack law demanded honest testimony and fair judgment. In theory. In practice, Marin suspected the outcome had already been decided. The circle was packed. Every major alpha in the territories had come, along with their betas and advisors and witnesses. Hundreds of wolves, all gathered to judge whether she deserved to live or die. Valen stood near the center, ice-blue eyes tracking her every movement. Beside him, Talia wore an expression of cold satisfaction. They'd orchestrated this, had stacked the deck, had made sure the council would see her as a threat. And they were winning. Maren could see it in the faces of the assembled alphas. Fear. Suspicion. They carefully maintained distance as she walked through the crowd, like they thought she might explode at any moment. Maybe she would. Kieran stayed close, his presence a solid warmth at her back, but even he couldn't shield her from the weight of all those hostile stares. The head arbiter, an ancient female with silver hair and eyes that had seen centuries of pack politics, raised her staff, and the crowd fell silent. "We are gathered to address the matter of Maren, formerly of Moonridge, currently claimed as mate to Alpha King Kieran of Silverbane. She stands accused of multiple crimes against pack law and is suspected of bearing the Moon-chosen bloodline. Let the testimonies begin." Valen stepped forward first, his voice carrying the practiced cadence of someone who'd given many formal speeches. "I testify that 3 days past, I witnessed the accused unleash uncontrolled power that devastated sacred ground and threatened the lives of 20 warriors. She demonstrated no ability to control her abilities and no remorse for the danger she posed." Lie. It was a lie wrapped in truth. Yes, she'd lost control. But she'd regained it, had pulled the power back, had specifically avoided killing anyone. But no one asked for her version. They just nodded and made notes and looked at her with increasing fear. Talia went next. "I testify that the accused challenged me to combat without provocation, used forbidden magic in human form, and expressed contempt for pack hierarchy and alpha authority. She represents everything the Moon-chosen bloodlines were purged for: arrogance, instability, and refusal to respect natural order." More lies. More twisting of events to paint her as the aggressor, the threat, the monster. Maren's hands clenched into fists, power flickering beneath her skin. Beside her, Kieran placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "Don't react. Don't give them ammunition." She forced herself to breathe, to bank the power, to stand silent and still while they built their case for her execution. Then the arbiter called the next witness and Maren's world tilted. "Torren of Moonridge. Step forward." Her brother emerged from the crowd, dressed in formal pack attire, his face carefully neutral. He approached the center of the circle, knelt briefly in respect to the arbiter, then rose to give his testimony. This was it. The final nail. Her own blood condemning her. Maren braced herself for the words that would destroy her. "I am Torren, enforcer of Moonridge, brother to the accused." His voice carried across the silent circle. "I have been summoned to testify about her character before she came to Silverbane. And I will speak the truth, as pack law demands." Here it comes, Maren thought. The disappointment. The shame. The confirmation that she'd always been worthless. Maren was born without the ability to shift, Torren began. Declared Omega at the age of 14. It was a source of great pain for our family and for her. She spent years trying to find ways to contribute, to be valuable despite her limitations. She worked harder than anyone I've ever known, trying to prove she was worth keeping. Maren's breath caught. That wasn't condemnation. That was acknowledgement. When rogues attacked our pack, many died. I blamed her for surviving when others didn't. Called her a coward for hiding instead of fighting. Torren's voice roughened. I was wrong. She did exactly what any powerless wolf should have done. She survived. And I condemned her for it because I was too angry, too grief-stricken, to see that survival takes its own kind of courage. The crowd shifted, murmuring. This wasn't the testimony they'd expected. I disowned my sister, Torren continued, and the shame in his voice was palpable. Told her she wasn't worth calling family. Drove her away from the only home she'd known. And she went to Silverbane and built a life anyway. Worked. Contributed. Mattered. He turned to look directly at Maren, and his eyes were shining with unshed tears. The wolf I knew was kind. Gentle. Determined to help others even when she couldn't help herself. If she has power now, if the moon chose to awaken the moon-chosen bloodline in her, it's because she's exactly the kind of person who should have that power. Someone who knows what it's like to be powerless. Who understands what it means to be dismissed and discarded and treated like you don't matter. Torrent's voice rose, addressing the entire council now. You're afraid of her. I understand that. Power is frightening, especially power that challenges the way things have always been. But I'm more afraid of what it says about us if we execute someone for the crime of being different. For daring to survive when the world wanted her dead. The silence that followed was absolute. Merrin couldn't breathe. Couldn't process what had just happened. Her brother, the one she'd sent away, the one she'd refused to forgive, had just defended her in front of the entire council. Had just publicly acknowledged his failure and vouched for her character. Had just risked his own standing to give her a chance. That is my testimony, Torrent finished. My sister deserves to live. Deserves the chance to learn to control her power. Deserves to be treated as a person, not a threat. And if you execute her, you'll be proving that nothing has changed since the Purge Wars. That we're still too afraid of power we can't control to let it exist. He knelt again to the Arbiter, then retreated to the edge of the circle. As he passed Merrin, their eyes met for a fraction of a second. She saw hope there. Pleading. A desperate wish that she'd accept what he'd just offered. She looked away. The Arbiter's staff struck the ground. Are there any who would speak in the accused defense? Kieran stepped forward immediately. I would speak. You are her mate. Your testimony is considered biased. I am also the Alpha King. And I have evidence that clears her of the original charges. Proof that she was framed, tortured, and condemned for a crime she did not commit. Kieran's voice rang with authority. I have the confession of my former beta, who admits to orchestrating everything, the poisoning, the frame, the torture. All of it to force her power to manifest so he could steal it for himself. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. This was new information for most of them. Her time in the dungeon was illegal, Kieran continued. A violation of her rights. She is owed reparations, not execution. And as for her power, yes, it's vast. Yes, it's dangerous if uncontrolled. But she's already demonstrated the ability to manage it. To pull back when pushed. To choose mercy over violence. She devastated sacred ground, Valen interjected. Threatened trained warriors. Showed complete disregard for. She defended herself when attacked. Kieran cut him off coldly. Your warrior shot first. She responded. And she could have killed all of you, should have, by rights, since you violated sacred ground with your aggression. But she didn't. She pulled her power back and let you leave. That's not instability. That's remarkable control under impossible circumstances. The Arbiter's ancient eyes moved from Kieran to Merrin, assessing, weighing. Does the accused wish to speak in her own defense? Every eye in the circle turned to Merrin. She should say something. Should thank Torrent for his testimony, should support Kieran's defense, should make some kind of plea for her life. But the words wouldn't come. She was too raw, too overwhelmed, too broken by the emotional whiplash of the last few hours. I have nothing to say, she heard herself rasp. You've already decided what I am. What I represent. Whether my brother's words or my mate's evidence will change that. She shrugged. I guess we'll find out. Not defiant. Not resigned. Just empty. The Arbiter studied her for a long moment. Then she raised her staff. The council will deliberate. The accused will wait for judgment. The Alphas gathered in clusters, voices rising in heated debate. Some pointed at Merrin with fear. Others with calculation. A very few, looked at her with something that might have been sympathy. Merrin stood in the center of the circle, alone despite being surrounded by hundreds of wolves, and waited for the world to decide if she deserved to exist. Beside her, Kieran's hand found hers, a silent offer of support, of connection, of not being completely alone. For the first time, Merrin didn't pull away. She laced her fingers through his and held on, letting the bond wrap around them both like armor. If they were going to condemn her, she'd face it standing beside the one person who'd proven, however imperfectly, that he would choose her even when it cost him everything. The moon rose overhead full and silver and serene. And in the circle of ancient stones, the council prepared to decide the fate of the last moon chosen. The deliberation lasted an eternity compressed into minutes. Maren watched the alphas argue, their voices rising and falling in waves of disagreement. Some gestured violently in her direction, clearly advocating for execution. Others spoke with calculated calm, probably suggesting containment or binding rituals, different cages, same result. A handful stood silent, observing, their expressions unreadable. Kieran's hand remained locked with hers, his thumb tracing small circles against her palm in unconscious comfort. The bond between them pulsed steadily, a rhythm that said, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here. Maren focused on that rhythm instead of the fear clawing at her throat. Instead of the faces of hundreds of wolves who looked at her and saw a problem to be solved, a threat to be neutralized, an aberration that challenged everything they understood about power and hierarchy. Finally, the Arbiter struck her staff against the stone. The sharp crack silenced every voice. The council has reached a decision. Maren's breath stopped. Beside her, Kieran went rigid, every muscle tensed for fight or flight. The Arbiter's ancient eyes settled on Maren with the weight of centuries. The charges of assault, forbidden magic, and threatening pack hierarchy have been examined. The testimony has been heard. The evidence has been weighed. Get on with it, Maren thought. Just say it. Execution, containment, exile, whatever they decided, the waiting was worse than knowing. It is the judgment of this council that the accused, Maren of Moonridge, be placed under supervised containment for a period of no less than 1 year, during which time she will be trained in the control of her abilities under the oversight of appointed council representatives. She will be confined to warded territory and will have no contact with outside packs until such time as she demonstrates complete mastery of her power. The words landed like blows. Not execution. But not freedom either. Another cage. Dressed up in formal language and justified as being for her own good, for public safety, for the stability of pack society. Another year of being locked away. Of having her choices stripped away. Of being treated like a dangerous animal that needed to be broken before it could be trusted. Furthermore, the Arbiter continued, the mate bond between the accused and Alpha King Kieran is to be suspended for the duration of containment. The king will not be permitted contact that might influence her training or compromise the neutrality of her oversight. Kieran made a sound low in his throat, not quite a growl, not quite a roar. Pure rage compressed into a single exhaled breath. You can't do that, he said, his voice deadly quiet. The mate bond is sacred. It's not something the council has authority over. We have authority over what threatens pack stability, Valen interjected smoothly. And a moon chosen bound to the most powerful Alpha King creates a dangerous concentration of power. Separating you during her training ensures she develops control independently, without relying on the bond to stabilize her. Lies. It was politics dressed as safety concerns. They were separating them because together, Maren and Kieran represented too much potential power, too much ability to challenge the traditional Alpha hierarchy. Divide and control. Tale as old as time. Maren felt Kieran gathering himself to fight, to challenge the council's authority, to burn every bridge in defense of their bond. She squeezed his hand once. Hard. A silent message, don't. He looked at her, shock and betrayal and desperate pleading warring in his golden eyes. Maren shook her head slightly. If he fought this, they'd find an excuse to execute her instead. This wasn't a battle they could win with rage and defiance. I accept the council's judgment, she heard herself say. The words tasted like ash. Maren, no, Kieran's grip on her hand tightened to the point of pain. I accept, she repeated, louder. Meeting the Arbiter's gaze steadily. 1 year of supervised training. Warded containment. No contact with outside packs. She paused. Where will I be held? The Arbiter's expression revealed nothing. The sanctum of first light. Ancient warded grounds, blessed by the moon, maintained by neutral pack historians and scholars. You will be provided tutors versed in the old ways. Your training will begin immediately. The Sanctum. Marin had heard of it, a legendary place where the first shifters were said to have learned to control their wolves. Remote. Isolated. So heavily warded that even an Alpha King couldn't breach its protections without permission. A prison dressed as a temple. When do I leave? Marin asked, proud that her voice remained steady. Tonight. Immediately following this gathering. Transport has been arranged. The Arbiter's words cut off as the temperature plummeted. Not gradually. Not a natural cooling as night deepened. This was instant, violent, the kind of cold that came from something fundamentally wrong with the world. Frost spread across the gathering stones in spiraling patterns. Every wolf's breath became visible. And the moon overhead, full and silver and serene just moments before, began to darken. Not red this time. Black. Like something was devouring its light from within. What is this? Talia demanded, power flaring around her in automatic defense. What's happening? Marin knew. She felt it in her bones, in the marks on her palms that suddenly burned like brands, in the power that surged beneath her skin in recognition and warning. The shadow that hungers. The prophecy hadn't been metaphor or distant future threat. It was here. Now. And it had been waiting for exactly this moment, when the last Moonchosen was surrounded by every major alpha in the territories, when they were all gathered in one place, when their attention was focused inward instead of outward. The perfect opportunity to strike. Darkness poured from the forest surrounding the gathering stones, not natural shadow, but something alive, something that moved with terrible intelligence and hunger. It flowed like water and smoke combined, tendrils reaching toward the circle of stones, toward the hundreds of wolves gathered within. The first wolf it touched screamed. The sound was inhuman, agonized, the cry of someone being unmade from the inside out. The darkness wrapped around him completely, and when it receded moments later, there was nothing left. Not even bones. Just scorched earth where a living being had stood. Chaos erupted. Wolves shifted in waves, the air filling with the sound of transformation and howling and terrified shouts. Alphas barked orders to their packs. Warriors formed defensive lines. The Arbiter's voice rose above the panic, calling for calm, for order, for coordinated response. But the shadow didn't care about pack hierarchy or organization or ancient laws. It just consumed everything it touched. Marin stood frozen in the center of the maelstrom, watching the darkness advance, feeling the wrongness of it crawl across her skin like insects. This entity, was old. Older than the Moon-chosen bloodline. Older than shifters themselves. Something from before, from the time when the moon goddess had first blessed her children with the gift of transformation. Something she'd sealed away because it was too dangerous to exist. And now it was free. A tendril of shadow lashed toward a group of younger wolves who were paralyzed with fear. They would die. In seconds, they would be consumed and erased, and no one was close enough to help. Marin's body moved before her mind caught up. She threw herself between the shadow and its targets, power exploding from her hands in a wave of silver light that hit the darkness like a physical wall. The two forces collided with a sound like reality tearing, sending shockwaves that knocked surrounding wolves off their feet. The shadow recoiled, actually pulled back from her light. Marin stood in the aftermath, breathing hard, her entire body glowing bright enough to hurt to look at. The marks on her palms blazed like captured stars. And she could feel it, the full extent of the power that had been dormant inside her all her life, finally unleashed, finally given permission to be what it was meant to be. Not a weapon. A shield. The shadow turned its attention toward her fully now, and Marin felt the weight of its regard like pressure against her skull. It was vast. Malevolent. Hungry in ways that went beyond physical consumption. It wanted to devour light itself. To return the world to primordial darkness. to unmake everything the moon goddess had created. And it saw Maren as the primary obstacle to that goal. The shadow gathered itself and struck. Not with a single tendril, but with dozens, all aimed at her from different angles, moving faster than thought. Maren didn't have time to think, to plan, to strategize. She just reacted on pure instinct. The power poured out of her in torrents. Silver light erupted from her skin, from her marks, from her very bones. It formed a dome around her, and the wolves she'd protected, solid as steel, but made of pure moonlight. The shadow's tendrils hit the dome and sizzled like water on hot metal, recoiling with something that might have been pain. Maren stood at the center of her shield, arms outstretched, every nerve in her body screaming as massive amounts of power channeled through her. This was beyond anything she'd done before. Beyond the clearing, beyond defending herself against Talia, beyond every small exercise Kieran had taught her. This was what the moon-chosen bloodline was made for. Standing between the darkness and the light. Protecting the vulnerable. Being the shield that could not break. Everyone get behind her. Kieran's voice cut through the chaos, alpha authority, making it impossible to ignore. Form defensive lines. Protect the moon-chosen while she... His words cut off as a massive tendril of shadow lashed toward him, too fast to dodge. Maren's power responded before she could think. A spear of silver light shot from her hand, piercing the shadow tendril and disintegrating it mid-strike. The effort nearly drove her to her knees, but she held. She had to hold. Around her, wolves were scrambling to obey Kieran's orders. The alphas formed a perimeter, warriors taking positions, the vulnerable being moved to the center. They were organizing into a proper defense, using her shield as the anchor point. They were trusting her, depending on her. The same wolves who'd been debating her execution minutes ago were now putting their lives in her hands. The irony would have been funny if she weren't currently trying not to collapse under the strain. Maren. Kieran was beside her, his hand on her shoulder, grounding. How long can you hold this? I don't know, she gasped. The truth. She had no idea what her limits were, had never pushed this hard or this long. The Arbiter says there's a ritual. Old magic that can reseal the shadow, but it requires time to prepare. 20 minutes minimum. 20 minutes. Eternity compressed into increments of 60 seconds. I'll hold, Maren gritted out. Just do it. Fast. Kieran's hand tightened on her shoulder, pride and fear and desperate hope flooding through the bond. Then he was gone, organizing the ritual, buying her the time she needed to keep everyone alive. The shadow attacked again. And again. And again. Each strike more vicious than the last, testing her shield for weaknesses, probing for gaps. Maren poured everything she had into maintaining the barrier, into keeping the light burning bright enough to hold back the darkness. Her legs shook. Her vision blurred. Blood began trickling from her nose, copper-bright and warm. The power was consuming her as surely as the shadow consumed its victims. She was burning herself up from the inside, using her own life force to fuel the shield because nothing else was strong enough. She was dying. Slowly, incrementally, but dying nonetheless. And she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Because stopping meant the shadow would pour through, would consume everyone in the circle, would erase hundreds of lives in seconds. She'd spent 6 months in a dungeon being tortured. Had survived 170 days of absolute hell. Had clawed her way back from death and powerlessness and complete despair. She hadn't survived all that just to fail now. I see you, Maren growled at the shadow, her voice raw. I see what you are. You're fear. You're the darkness that tells us we're not strong enough, not worthy enough, not enough period. You're every voice that said I was worthless, every moment I believed I should just give up and die. And I'm done listening. The power flared brighter, fed by her rage and her refusal and her absolute determination to be the shield these people needed. The shadow writhed, pushing harder against her barrier, and Maren pushed back with equal force. They were locked in a stalemate, her light versus its darkness, both vast and ancient and absolutely unwilling to yield. Somewhere behind her, she could hear the Arbiter chanting in a language older than words, could feel other power building as the ritual took shape. The Alphas were contributing their strength, feeding the ritual, preparing to seal the shadow away again. But they needed more time. Minutes more. Maren didn't know if she had minutes left. Her legs gave out. She fell to her knees, arms still outstretched, shield still holding but flickering now. Weakness spreading through her body like poison. Too much. This was too much. She couldn't hold it. Couldn't. A hand grabbed hers. Warm and solid and alive. Kieran, kneeling beside her, his power flowing into her through their joined hands, through the bond, feeding her the strength she desperately needed. "You're not alone," he said fiercely. "You don't have to carry this by yourself." Then another hand joined. And another. Wolves she didn't know, offering their strength, their power, their support. Torin appeared on her other side, his familiar presence settling something in her chest. "I've got you, little sister. We've got you. More hands. More power." A web of connection and strength flowing into her, sustaining her, letting her draw from their collective will instead of burning herself to ash. The shield stabilized, brightened, grew stronger even as the shadow pressed harder. Maren looked around at the faces surrounding her, alphas and warriors and ordinary wolves, all contributing what they could. United not by hierarchy or pack affiliation, but by shared need. Shared humanity. Shared determination to survive. This was what the Moon Chosen were meant to inspire. Not fear. Not subjugation. But unity in the face of darkness. The understanding that some threats were too big for any individual, any pack, any alpha to face alone. The Arbiter's chanting reached a crescendo. The ritual activated. Ancient magic, older even than the shadow, rose from the gathering stones themselves. Patterns of light that had been carved into the megaliths thousands of years ago blazed to life, forming symbols that hurt to look at directly. The shadow felt it coming. Thrashed violently, throwing everything it had at Maren's shield in one final desperate assault. The barrier cracked. Light splintering like broken glass. Maren screamed, pouring every last drop of power into holding the line, into keeping the shield intact for just a few seconds longer. The ritual completed. Chains of pure light erupted from the gathering stones, wrapping around the shadow, binding it, dragging it down and down and down into the earth. The darkness fought, shrieked with a sound that made everyone's ears bleed, but the ancient magic was absolute. Inexorable. The shadow was pulled beneath the earth, sealed in whatever prison the moon goddess had originally created for it, locked away from the world once more. Silence descended, absolute and ringing. Then, slowly, wolves began to stir, to check themselves for injuries, to realize they'd survived. Maren's shield dissolved. The power that had been pouring through her cut off like a severed rope, and she collapsed backward. Kieran caught her before she hit the ground, gathering her against his chest, his heart pounding so hard she could feel it through his ribs. "You did it," he breathed. "You held. You magnificent, stubborn, impossible, you did it." Maren tried to respond, but her throat wouldn't work. Her body felt like it had been hollowed out, scraped clean, every resource depleted. She'd never been so exhausted in her entire life. Around them, wolves were gathering. Not with fear or suspicion this time. With awe. With gratitude. With the dawning understanding of what she'd just done. The Arbiter approached slowly, leaning heavily on her staff, looking every one of her ancient years. "You saved us. All of us. When you could have let the shadow take us, when you had every reason to stand aside and let your judges be consumed, you stood between us and annihilation." Maren managed to lift her head slightly. "Wasn't going to let people die. Even people who wanted me in a cage." A ghost of a smile crossed the Arbiter's weathered face. "Yes, I see that now. We all see it. She turned to address the assembled wolves, her voice carrying despite its roughness. Let it be known, the judgment of containment is hereby revoked. Maren of the Moonchosen bloodline has proven beyond any doubt that her power is not a threat, but a blessing. She is guardian, not destroyer. Shield, not sword. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Furthermore, the Arbiter continued, let it be recorded that the prophecy has been fulfilled. The last daughter rose from death. She was marked by suffering and crowned by the goddess. And she stood with the wolf who broke her against the shadow that hungers. Together, they did not fall. And, because they stood, neither did we. The Arbiter's ancient eyes found Maren's. You are free, child. Free to choose your own path. Free to use your power as you see fit. And should you choose to stand as protector of these territories, we would be honored to have you. An offer. Not a demand or an expectation or a cage dressed as duty. A genuine offer of place and purpose. Maren looked at Kieran at the relief and pride and bone-deep exhaustion in his face. Looked at Torin, who was watching her with a tentative hope. Looked at the hundreds of wolves who'd just witnessed what the Moonchosen bloodline was truly meant for. She could walk away, take the freedom they were offering and disappear. Live quietly somewhere far from prophecy and politics and the weight of destiny. Or she could stay. Could choose to be what the vision had shown her, the shield between the darkness and the light. The guardian who'd survived hell and came out strong enough to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. I need time, Maren said finally. To heal. To think. To figure out who I am when I'm not fighting for my life or my right to exist. The Arbiter nodded. Of course. Take what time you need. The offer stands. Wolves began to disperse, checking on pack members, dealing with the aftermath of the attack. But many lingered, approaching Maren with quiet thanks, with gestures of respect, with the acknowledgement that she'd earned through blood and pain and absolute refusal to break. Valen approached, his ice-blue eyes unreadable. For a long moment, he just studied her. Then, slowly, he inclined his head. Not a bow, alphas didn't bow, but acknowledgement of an equal. I misjudged you, he said simply. I saw a threat where I should have seen a protector. I apologize. It wasn't groveling or dramatic. Just honest admission of error. Maren found herself nodding in return. You were afraid. Fear makes people do stupid things. I understand. Something that might have been respect flickered in Valen's eyes. Then he turned and departed, his warriors falling into formation around him. Talia was next. Her amber eyes held calculation along with the grudging respect. You're still dangerous, she said bluntly. But perhaps that's what we need. Something dangerous on our side for once. Not quite an apology. But not hostility either. Progress. When the last of the well-wishers and the wary had departed, Maren found herself alone with Kieran and Torin. Her brother looked uncertain, like he didn't know if he had permission to be there. I should go. Let you rest. But he stopped, swallowed hard. I meant what I said. In my testimony. You deserved better than what I gave you. What our pack gave you. And, if you'll let me, I'd like to be your brother again. For real this time. Maren looked at him, this male who'd hurt her and was now trying to make amends. She was too tired for grand forgiveness, for emotional reconciliation. But she was also tired of holding grudges. Tired of letting old pain dictate every choice. One step at a time, she said quietly. I can't promise I'll ever fully trust you again. Can't promise we'll be what we were. But I'm willing to try. To see if we can build something new. Relief transformed Torin's face. That's more than I deserve. Thank you. He squeezed her shoulder once, but the truth was she did need help. Needed rest and safety and someone to watch her back while she put herself back together. And Kieran had proven, over and over in the past few days, that he would stand with her even when it cost him everything. Okay, she whispered. Take me home. She felt him startle slightly. Home. Wherever you're staying. Wherever feels safe. Maren's eyes were already closing. Just somewhere I can sleep for about a century. Kieran lifted her carefully, cradling her against his chest like she was something precious instead of something broken. The bond hummed contentedly at the closeness, and for once, Maren didn't fight it. As he carried her away from the gathering stones, away from the assembled witnesses and the sight of her greatest triumph, Maren let herself drift. She'd faced the darkness and held the line. Had proven she was guardian, not monster. Had earned freedom and respect and the right to choose her own path. Tomorrow, she'd figure out what that path looked like. Would decide if she wanted to stay and be the shield these territories needed, or if she wanted to walk away and build a quiet life somewhere no one knew her name. Tomorrow, she'd deal with her complicated feelings about Kieran and Torin and the bond that tied her to a future she hadn't chosen. Tomorrow, she'd be strong and decisive and all the things a moon chosen was supposed to be. But tonight, she let herself be carried. Let herself be cared for. Let herself be, for just a few hours, not the guardian or the survivor or the last of a legendary bloodline. Just Maren. Exhausted and scared and hopeful in equal measure. Just herself. And that, for now, was enough. The moon watched over them as they disappeared into the forest, silver and serene and satisfied with her champion. The shadow had been sealed. The prophecy fulfilled. The last daughter had risen and claimed her power. And the world would never be quite the same. Maren woke to sunlight and the scent of pine. For a disorienting moment, she didn't know where she was. Not the dungeon, the light was all wrong, and she could hear birds singing. Not the sacred grove, the air didn't hum with ancient power. Not the gathering stones, there were no voices, no crowds, no weight of judgment pressing down on her. She was in a bed. An actual bed with soft furs and pillows that smelled like cedar and winter storms. A small cabin surrounded her, rustic but well-maintained, with windows that let in golden morning light and a fireplace that held the embers of a dying fire. Safe. She was safe. The realization hit her with unexpected force. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she'd woken up without immediate danger. Without pain. Without the bone-deep certainty that survival required constant vigilance. She was safe, and her body didn't know what to do with that information. Maren sat up slowly, cataloging sensations. Her muscles ached deep, profound exhaustion that came from pushing far beyond normal limits, but it was healing ache, not injury. The marks on her palms glowed faintly, pulsing in time with her heartbeat. And the power that had nearly consumed her last night was still there, settled beneath her skin like a second heartbeat, but quieter now. Resting. Waiting. A sound from outside drew her attention. She rose carefully, wrapping one of the furs around herself. Her tattered shift had been replaced at some point with a simple dress that actually fit, and made her way to the window. Kieran stood in the clearing outside the cabin, bare-chested despite the morning chill, moving through what looked like combat forms. His body was a study in controlled violence, every movement precise and powerful, muscles flowing beneath scarred skin. But it was his expression that caught her. Peaceful. Almost meditative. This wasn't training or practice. This was ritual. A way of finding center, of processing, of being present in his body after chaos. Maren watched him move and felt something shift in her chest. Not the bond, though that hummed contentedly at his nearness, but something deeper. Recognition. Understanding. He was just as broken as she was, just in different ways. And he was trying, every day, to be better than his worst moments. Wasn't that all any of them could do? The door opened behind her. Maren turned to find Torin entering with an armload of firewood, freezing when he saw she was awake. "You're up," he said unnecessarily. Then, awkward, "How do you feel?" "Like I held back the apocalypse and survived." Maren's voice was rough from sleep and screaming. "So, better than expected, all things considered." A ghost of a smile crossed Torin's face. "That's very you. Facing the end of the world and still finding room for sarcasm." Someone has to maintain a sense of humor. Might as well be me. Torrent set the firewood by the hearth, his movements careful, respectful of her space. Kieran carried you here last night. You slept for 14 hours straight. He's been keeping watch, making sure no one disturbed your rest. Of course he had. Merrin looked out the window again, watching her mate move through his forms, and felt that complicated tangle of emotions that came with thinking about him. Anger and gratitude. Resentment and respect. The desire to hold him at arm's length warring with the pull to let him closer. He loves you, you know, Torrent said quietly. I've seen a lot of bonds in my years as an enforcer. Most are functional, mates who care for each other, build lives together, make it work. But the way he looks at you. He paused. That's the kind of bond the old stories talk about. The kind that breaks the world or remakes it. Nothing in between. Merrin's throat tightened. I don't know if I can love him back. Not after everything. Maybe that's not what he needs. Maybe he just needs you to let him try. To give him the chance to prove he can be worthy, even if he never fully gets there. And what do I need? The question came out rawer than she intended. Torrent was quiet for a long moment. I think you need to decide who you want to be now. Not the Omega you were told you were. Not just the moon chosen everyone wants you to be. But Merrin. The person beneath all the labels and expectations and trauma. The truth of it settled into her bones. Everyone wanted something from her. The council wanted a guardian. The prophecy wanted a hero. The bond wanted her to be a perfect mate. Even the moon goddess seemed to want her to embrace a destiny she'd never asked for. But what did Merrin want? I don't know who that person is, she admitted. I've spent so long being what other people needed or expected that I'm not sure there's anything left underneath. Just scars and survival instincts and power I barely understand. Then maybe that's where you start, Torrent said. Not by being anyone's shield or anyone's mate or anyone's symbol. Just by being. Seeing what emerges when you give yourself permission to exist without purpose or expectation. It sounded so simple. So impossible. Before Merrin could respond, Kieran entered the cabin, immediately zeroing in on her with eyes that held relief and concern in equal measure. You're awake. Are you? How do you feel? Do you need anything? Water, food, healing. I'm fine, Merrin interrupted gently. Tired, but fine. Kieran looked like he wanted to argue, to insist on checking her over, on ensuring she was completely recovered. But he stopped himself, respecting her boundaries even when his instincts clearly screamed otherwise. The restraint, the visible effort it took him to give her space, made something in Merrin's chest ache. I'll give you 2 privacy, Torrent said, moving toward the door. He paused beside Merrin, close enough to speak quietly. For what it's worth, I'm proud of you. Not for the power or the prophecy or any of that. Just for surviving. For refusing to let the world break you even when it tried its absolute hardest. Then he was gone, leaving Merrin alone with Kieran and the weight of everything unspoken between them. The silence stretched, not uncomfortable but heavy with possibility. With choice. I need to tell you something, Kieran said finally. The council met again this morning. Early. To discuss what happened at the Gathering Stones. Merrin's stomach dropped. And? They want to formally recognize you as guardian of the territories. Give you authority independent of any pack, answerable only to the council as a whole. You'd have resources, support, the right to travel freely and intervene in threats as you see fit. A position. A role. A cage dressed as honor. And if I refuse? Merrin asked. Then you refuse. They made it clear, this is an offer, not a demand. You're free to walk away. To build whatever life you want, wherever you want. They'll respect that choice. Would they? Or would they just find subtler ways to pressure her, to manipulate her into the role they needed her to fill? Merrin moved to the window, staring out at the forest that surrounded the cabin. So vast. So full of places she could disappear into, could build a quiet life far from prophecy and politics and the weight of being the last of a bloodline. She could feel Kieran's gaze on her back. Patient. Waiting. What do you think I should do? She asked. I think, Kieran said carefully, that you should do whatever will let you sleep at night. Whatever will let you look at yourself in the mirror and recognize the person staring back. I've spent 10 years making choices based on duty and obligation and what other people needed from me. I'm not going to ask you to do the same. Marin turned to face him. But you want me to stay? To accept the position? To be the guardian they need? I want you to be happy, Kieran corrected. If that means staying and protecting the territories, I'll support you. If it means disappearing into the wilderness and never speaking to another wolf as long as you live, I'll support that too. Even if it means I never see you again. The sincerity in his voice, the absolute acceptance without condition, made her eyes burn. You'd let me go? Marin whispered. Just like that? The bond doesn't it hurt you when we're apart? It does. Kieran's jaw clenched. Like missing a limb. Like breathing through broken ribs. Every instinct I have screams to keep you close, to never let you out of my sight. But I've already made the mistake of letting my needs override someone else's agency. I won't do it again. Especially not with you. He crossed to stand before her, close but not touching, giving her the choice of distance or connection. I love you, he said simply. I love your strength and your rage, and the way you survived hell, and came out still capable of protecting people who wanted to cage you. I love that you're stubborn and sarcastic and refuse to be what anyone expects. I love you, Marin. Not the moon chosen. Not the symbol or the guardian or the mate bond. You. Tears spilled down Marin's cheeks before she could stop them. I don't know if I can say it back. I don't know if what I feel is love or just the bond or trauma bonding or... I don't need you to say it back, Kieran interrupted gently. I just needed you to know. So that whatever you decide with full information. You are loved. You are wanted. Not for what you can do or what power you carry. Just for being you. Marin's breath hitched. No one had ever said that to her before. Not her parents. Not her pack. Not even Torin before everything fell apart. She was loved. Just for existing. Just for being herself. The concept was so foreign, so overwhelming, that she didn't know what to do with it. Kieran seemed to sense her spiraling. You don't have to decide anything right now. Take time. Heal. Figure out who you are and what you want. I'll be here. Whether you want me or not, whether you choose to stay or go, I'll be here. That's my choice. And nothing you do will change it. An oath. Unbreakable and absolute. Marin looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the alpha king or the male who'd failed her or even her fated mate. Just Kieran. Flawed and trying and absolutely sincere in his devotion. She could push him away. Could reject the bond and the love and all the complicated feelings that came with them. Could walk away and never look back. Or she could choose differently. Not forgiveness, she wasn't ready for that, might never be ready for that. But possibility. The chance to see what they could build together if they both kept choosing each other, one day at a time. Slowly, giving herself every opportunity to change her mind, Marin lifted her hand and placed it against Kieran's chest. Over his heart. Feeling the steady rhythm beneath her palm. He went utterly still, barely breathing, like he was afraid any movement might spook her. I'm angry at you, Marin said quietly. I'm going to be angry for a long time. Maybe forever. What happened in the dungeon, that's not something I can just get over. I know, Kieran breathed. But I'm also grateful to you. For standing with me. For choosing me even when it cost you politically. For keeping your oaths even when they hurt. She paused, gathering courage. And I think I could maybe love you. Eventually. If we both keep trying. If you keep proving that the male I've seen these past few days is who you really are, not just who you're pretending to be to earn forgiveness. Hope blazed in Kieran's eyes, so bright it was almost painful to witness. I'll prove it, he said fiercely. Every day for the rest of our lives, I'll prove it. Marin nodded slowly. Then, before she could overthink it, she leaned forward and pressed her forehead to his. The bond surged between them, singing with joy and relief and desperate hope. They stood like that for a long moment, breathing each other's air, connected but not quite embracing, taking the first tentative step towards something that might, someday, become the bond the prophecy had spoken of. When they finally pulled apart, Maren felt steadier, more centered. "I need time," she said, "to heal, to think, to figure out what I want my life to look like." "Take all the time you need," Kieran said. "I'll be here." And then, Maren took a breath. "Then I think I want to accept the council's offer, to be the guardian. Not because they need me to be, or because the prophecy says I should, but because I know what it's like to be powerless, to need protection and not have it. And if I can stand between people and the darkness, if I can make sure no one else has to feel what I felt in that dungeon, then maybe all the pain meant something." Kieran's expression was so full of pride and love it made her chest ache. "You're going to change everything. The whole structure of pack society. They won't know what hit them." "Good," Maren said, and felt the truth of it settle into her bones. It's about time someone shook things up. They emerged from the cabin together, into sunlight and the promise of a future neither of them could fully predict. Torin was waiting by the tree line, and he straightened when he saw them, relief crossing his features. "So," he asked, "what happens now?" Maren looked at her brother, at her mate, at the forest surrounding them and the path that led back to civilization. Back to the council and responsibilities and a role she'd never asked for but was choosing anyway. "Now," she said, "I become who I was always meant to be. Not the Omega everyone dismissed. Not just the moon chosen of prophecy. But Maren. Guardian. Survivor. Someone who knows what it's like to be broken and chooses to protect others from the same fate." She lifted her marked palms to the sunlight, watching them glow with power that was finally, fully hers. Power she understood not as a curse or a burden, but as a gift. A responsibility. A choice. "Now," she continued softly, "I stop running from what I am and start running toward what I could be." The words felt like truth. Like purpose. Like the first step of a journey that would define the rest of her life. Kieran's hand found hers, fingers lacing together, the bond humming with contentment. Not demanding anything, just present. Supportive. A reminder that she didn't have to walk this path alone. Maren squeezed his hand once, then released it. Because this choice, this path, had to be hers alone. Not walked for him or because of him, but because it was what she wanted. And for the first time in her entire life, Maren knew exactly what she wanted. To matter. Not because of power or bloodline or destiny, but because she chose to. Because she took the worst thing that ever happened to her and transformed it into purpose. To protect. Not because she was obligated to, but because she remembered what it felt like to need protection and have none. To survive. Not just exist or endure, but truly live. To build a life defined by her choices instead of her circumstances. To love. Eventually. When she was ready. When the wounds had healed enough to let someone in without fear of being destroyed again. The path forward wouldn't be easy. She knew that. There would be challenges, threats, moments when the darkness pressed close and she questioned everything. But she'd survived 170 days in hell. Had held back the shadow that hungers with nothing but will and power she barely understood. Had looked at the council that wanted to cage her and proven she was guardian, not threat. She could survive whatever came next. More than survive. She could thrive. Maren turned her face to the sun, letting the warmth sink into her skin, into her bones, into the places that had been cold for so long she'd forgotten what warmth felt like. This was what freedom tasted like. Not the absence of responsibility, but the presence of choice. The knowledge that every step forward was hers, made with full awareness and agency. The dungeon had tried to break her. Had come so close to succeeding that sometimes she still felt the ghost of chains on her wrists. But she'd broken free. Had transformed pain into power, suffering into strength, victimhood into agency. And now she was going to use everything she'd learned, everything she'd survived, to make sure no one else had to walk through that particular hell alone. The moon would watch over her. The bond would support her when she let it. The power would be her shield and her strength. But the choice to keep going, keep fighting, keep becoming more than the sum of her scars, that was hers alone. And Maren chose to rise. Again and again and again, for as long as it took. Not because she was moon-chosen or fated or destined, but because she was Maren. And Maren didn't know how to quit. So here's the question that matters, the one that sits at the heart of every survival story, every tale of transformation. Would you have chosen her side? When she was rotting in the dungeon, accused of crimes she didn't commit, screaming truths no one wanted to hear, would you have listened? Would you have questioned the narrative? Would you have wondered if maybe, just maybe, the powerless Omega everyone dismissed might have been telling the truth? Or would you have been like the rest of them, comfortable in your assumptions, certain that where there's smoke, there must be fire, convinced that someone so weak, so powerless, couldn't possibly matter enough to fight for? When she emerged from that hell glowing with power, dangerous and unstable, and everything the prophecies warned about, would you have seen the guardian she could become? Or just the threat she appeared to be? Would you have voted for execution? For containment? For any of the 100 ways the council tried to cage her, control her, make her safe by making her small? Or would you have stood beside her when the shadow came? Would you have offered your strength when she was burning herself to ash to keep everyone alive? Would you have seen past the fear to the truth, that sometimes the most powerful thing in the world is someone who knows what it's like to be powerless and refuses to let others suffer the same fate? Here's what Maren's story asks of us. What do we do with power that doesn't fit our comfortable categories? With people who survive things that should have destroyed them and emerge different, dangerous, unwilling to be quiet and grateful just for being allowed to exist? Do we cage them? Control them? Try to force them back into the boxes we understand? Or do we make space for transformation? For rage that's earned? For power that comes from surviving hell and choosing to use that survival to protect others? Maren spent 170 days being tortured for a crime she didn't commit. She had every reason to let the world burn. Every justification for becoming the monster they accused her of being. Instead, she became the shield. Not because she was inherently good or noble, or any of that heroic nonsense, but because she knew what it felt like to be helpless, and she couldn't stand by while others experienced that same terror. That's the heart of it. The truth beneath the prophecy and the power and the mate bond, and all the fantasy elements. Sometimes the people who've been hurt the worst become the best protectors. Because they remember. They carry the scars. They know intimately what they're fighting against. And sometimes the people who seem most dangerous, the ones who glow with power and refuse to be controlled, are exactly what the world needs. Not in spite of their rage and their refusal to submit, but because of it. Maren didn't save everyone at the Gathering Stones by being gentle or accommodating or any of the things Omegas are supposed to be. She saved them by being exactly what she was, scarred, angry, powerful, unwilling to let the darkness win. She saved them by choosing to, even when they'd given her every reason not to. That's the kind of strength that changes everything. Not the strength to dominate or control, but the strength to protect even when it costs you everything. To stand when you have every reason to fall. To choose compassion when rage would be so much easier. So the question remains, would you have chosen her side? When she was nobody, would you have seen her potential? When she was dangerous, would you have trusted her judgment? When she was standing between you and annihilation, burning herself to ash to keep you safe, would you have given her your strength? Or would you have been like the council, so afraid of what she represented that you couldn't see what she actually was? The answer matters. Not just for Maren's story, but for every story. Every person who's been dismissed, caged, told they're too much or not enough or too dangerous to exist as they are. Because the world is full of Marens. People who survived impossible things and emerged transformed. People whose power doesn't fit comfortable categories. People who refuse to be small just to make others comfortable. And what we do with them, how we respond to their rage, their power, their refusal to submit, that defines us. Marin's story isn't over. This is just the beginning, the moment she chooses to rise, to claim her power, to walk a path no moon chosen has walked in 3 centuries. There are threats still hunting her, prophecies still unfolding, a bond with a mate who broke her and is now trying to prove he can be worthy, a brother seeking redemption, a counsel that will challenge her at every turn, and powers older than time itself, waiting in the dark for another chance to devour the light. But now she's ready. Not because she's healed some wounds never fully close. Not because she's forgiven forgiveness isn't always possible or even necessary. But because she's chosen. Chosen to use her pain as fuel. Her scars as armor. Her power as a shield. She's chosen to rise. Again and again and again. And that makes all the difference. If this story grabbed you by the throat and refused to let go, if you felt Marin's rage, her pain, her refusal to break even when the world gave her every reason to, if you need to know what happens next, how she navigates her power, her bond, her transformation from victim to guardian, then subscribe to Shayla's Romance Library. Because this is where we tell the stories that don't let go. The ones that sink their teeth in and refuse to release. The ones that ask uncomfortable questions and demand you feel everything, the rage, the hope, the impossible transformations that come from surviving hell. We don't do simple here. We don't do comfortable. We tell tales of people who were broken and became weapons. Who were caged and became guardians. Who were dismissed as nothing and proved they were everything. Stories that burn. And Marin's story? This is just the beginning. Subscribe. Because you need to know if she learns to love the mate who destroyed her. If she masters the power that could consume her. If she stands against the darkness when it comes again, and it will come again. Subscribe to Shayla's Romance Library. Because here, we don't just tell werewolf romances. We tell the stories of wolves who refuse to be tamed. And that changes everything. This story asked you to feel, to question, to stand beside someone the world wanted to cage and decide, would you protect her, or would you be another person who chose safety over justice? Marin rose from the dungeon, from the council's judgment, from the shadow itself. Now the question is, will you rise with her? Subscribe to Shayla's Romance Library and find out what happens when the Moon Chosen stops running and starts fighting back.